Okay. This is the regular board meeting of February 9th, 2023. It is now 4:32 and we will begin roll call.
President Chavez,
Present.
Vice President Cortese,
Here.
Clerk Doe,
He's on his way.
on his way,
Or he's actually via Zoom, sorry.
Member Doe's via Zoom, Member.
Here,
Heard him loud and clear.
here, sorry.
Member Ada's on his way. Member Lay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so are there any members of the public who'd like to provide any public comment to the board on a closed session agenda item at this time?
We have no in-person, nor do we have any online public comment.
Great. The board will now recess to closed session. Okay, welcome to the regular board meeting of February 9th, 2023. Members of the public, please submit your public comment as follows. You may raise your virtual hand in Zoom to request to speak and offer comment in real time. In-person commenters will be allowed entry 3 speakers in the boardroom at a time. Upon conclusion of a speaker's public comment on the agenda item, the speaker must exit the boardroom. You may also submit your public comment online by accessing the link to the form on the district homepage at www.esuhsd.org or the link on the agenda. Please reference the agenda item number in your written comment and limit your written comments to no more than 1,000 characters in length. Public comments submitted online will be read into the record. Please note, all meetings are recorded. All regular and special meetings of the Board of Trustees and board study sessions are streamed live on the meeting nights and are also available for your viewing the day after the meeting by accessing the district's YouTube channel listed on the district's webpage at www.esuhsd.org under the quick link section. The board is not able to respond to items that are not on the agenda or any personnel issues. Your comments will be read into the record and will be directed to the superintendent and/or appropriate staff member for response. Interpretation of this meeting in Spanish and Vietnamese can be heard by accessing the link and following the instructions shown on the agenda on the district website. So welcome, everybody. All right, so now we are going to be going into item number or section number 5. Or actually, is there? Oh, it's not here, but yeah. Okay, well, let's do it. Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, thank you for that. Now we are on section 5, adoption of the agenda. So I don't believe there's an action here, but well, does the superintendent or any board member would like to request any items to be removed from the agenda or carried to future meeting?
I would like to move item 12.1, instructional material. Move to before 8.01.
Can administration,
Two?
yeah, put it right before 8.02.
Right before 8.02.
And actually, it works better as a request versus a motion. Because we just,
Yeah, this is just, this is not, we're not moving anything, but these are just if there's any requests. So 12.01 to where?
To before 8.02.
Okay.
Before 8:02.
All right, so 12.01 will be right after 8.01. 12.01. Great. Is there anything else? Any other requests?
None from administration.
Great. Okay. So that's section 5. Section 6, there are no board special recognitions. So we can move on to section 7, 7.01, Lee Henny.
Since the last board meeting, SGB has focused on finalizing the AP exam infographics and resources for students who will be taking the exams online in May. And then additionally, we've been discussing and gathering resources for the resources and rights pages on each school's websites, and have also been working on addressing the issues of restroom maintenance and quality across the district. We're currently in the process of compiling information on the number of locked and inaccessible restrooms, and also the quality of restrooms at least 7 of the district schools, and we'll have that information available before the next meeting, and that's all.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, now we are on to section 8, 8.01. Similar to the adoption of the agenda, superintendent and our board members may request that items be considered, discussed, or active out of order. So we've already moved item 12.01 to go after 8.01. Is there anything else? Staff or colleagues?
Not from staff.
Colleagues, I don't see anything, so I will take that as a no. Okay, so that is section 8 or item 8.01. All right, so now we are item 12.01, board presentation under discussion regarding instruction materials, development and approval processes. Associate Superintendent Teresa Marquez.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam President, trustees, superintendent, superintendent's council, and our community. Teresa Marquez, Associate Superintendent of Educational Services. I'm super excited to be able to come and share with you and our community our processes, policies, and practices that we use as a district in development and approval of our instructional practices. Our presentation for this evening will address the following items. One, we will look at that big picture policies and practices that we have in place as part of school district in California, which include our California Department of Education requirements and guidelines. We'll look at the existing board policies that we have in place, as well as our administrative regulations that are specific to our instructional materials. We'll also look at the UC A through G approval process that is also guidelines that we use as part of our process for development and approval of instructional materials. I'll share with you some examples of some instructional materials and the process that was followed to give perspective. And then I'm going to have my Director of Instructional Services, Ms. Marta Guerrero, to come and share information specific to one of our subject area coordinator projects, specific to our Vietnamese language program. And then we'll end with some areas for growth that we've identified within our processes, as well as some future plans and next steps. So as always, everything that we do in Eastside and specifically in educational services is grounded in our promise of college and career readiness for all our students. And for us, we look to attain that by approaching it through the whole child, which means we look at it at academics, behavior, and social emotional. And for us, being college and career ready looks like our graduate profile, which means that our students are graduating as effective communicators, critical thinkers, collaborators, creators, community members that can thrive not only locally, but in a global society. And we realize that for us in Eastside, we're going to attain this promise, and we're going to keep this promise by creating equitable communities. And for us, it means that we're welcoming every student just as they are, that we're looking at their strengths and areas of growth and supporting those strengths and areas of growth, that we're responding positively to whatever the needs it is that they bring, and that when engaged in the classroom, our students are engaged with tasks that are really going to push them to be those strategic thinkers that are going to find success, again, not only in their local communities, but in their global society. And we're gonna do this through a systems lens, through a systems response, meaning we're gonna look at it through policy, through access, and through practice. And so for us, when we look at the development and approval process of our instructional materials, that is a great example of how we respond as a system, because we're looking at policy, we're looking at access, and we're looking at practice. One of those policies that I like to point out to and start with is Board Policy 6000.1, which really sets the ground, sets the tone for our work in educational services as well as the district as a whole. This is our statement of educational philosophy. And if you look, I've highlighted some key language in red, that if you read it, it is exactly connected to our equitable communities. This is our board policy statement of educational philosophy, that we accept each student where they are, that we respect their ambition, ability, and cultural heritage, that we encourage their achievement in a society that's influenced by changing sociological and economic forces. The world changes constantly, and we have to prepare our students for an ever-changing world. And we have that right there in our statement of philosophy. And specifically, it's also clearly expressed in how we're going to realize that. And I'll highlight just a few. We're going to help our students develop a feeling of pride, personal dignity, respect, and appreciation for the worth of others. Another one that I will highlight is that we're going to help each student utilize their potential through a varied and flexible curriculum. Varied and flexible curriculum, which reflects a concern for individual differences. We're going to include our parents, students, and faculty as integral parts of the process. We're going to assess continually the needs of a changing world so that we develop educational programs that are going to enable our students to be able to thrive, not only in their local communities, but in that global world. And finally, I just point out the last two. Our statement of philosophy very clearly states as part of our board policy that we're going to help to eliminate all forms of discrimination and encourage each student to value their own cultural heritage. And that we're going to help them understand their responsibility of maintaining and implementing the ideals of a country that we live in, which is those democratic ideals. So it's there. Our board policy is there that clearly speaks to our statement of educational philosophy that guides our work that we do in Ed Services. So, big picture. Instructional materials are one component of what constitutes high quality instruction. For us, we want to make sure that we have a high quality instruction program that addresses the behavioral, the academic, and the wellness needs of all our students. And because we are a public educational institution, we are bound by a number of different entities, right? And so the ultimate goal is that high quality instruction, where the California Department of Education has a say in that. They develop frameworks, content standards, skills, and mandates. Our district has a say in that through our mission and vision, through the goals that we establish, through our board policies and administrative regulations. Universities and colleges have a say in that. They have an expectation of how we're going to prepare our students so that they can find success at the post-secondary institutions. They have requirements. They have expectations of student readiness. And then our community and business organizations, they have an expectation of how we're preparing those students, right? They expect us to produce skilled labor. They have expectations of the workforce that they're looking to hire. And so all of this contributes to the determination of what that high quality instructional program looks like. And instructional materials are one component of that. So let's dig into that. So I start with the California Department of Education requirements and guidelines that we're bound to. And so we start with the content standards. We do not as a district, develop those content standards. They are developed by a group of experts at the state level that comprise of teachers, administrators, community members, and the content standards give us what to teach, right? What do we need to teach in each of our subject areas? You're probably very familiar because there was a lot of talk and discussion, even for us here at the district level, of the Common Core standards, right? Common Core standards were developed in math and in language arts back in 2010. They were revised in 2013. That was the work of the State Board of Education. That was the work at the state level that said, here's the what to teach. You also probably heard about the Next Generation Science Standards. Those were created back in September 2013, which also developed for science to make sure that there's alignment across the state of California on what it is that we're expected to teach our students in each of those subject areas. And just really quick, I'm a former math teacher. So a math standard would be something like create equations and inequalities in one variable and use them to solve problems. And then just for reference, there's a task that would actually meet that particular standard in a class. And so just to give you an idea, start with the standards. Those are set by the California Department of Education. I do want to point out that when new standards are developed and adopted by the State Board of Education, we are then as a school district expected to evaluate our existing instructional materials, our program, to ensure that there's alignment, to make sure that our instructional materials are still going to be the tools that we need to be able to have the students attain mastery, proficiency in the standards. And a lot of times, textbook publisher companies, instructional materials have to play catch up, right? They have to play catch up to the new standards that are created and adopted. We also have, as part of the Department of Education requirements and guidelines, what we call frameworks. One of the newest one is the World Language Framework, which Ms. Guerrero in a few minutes will be able to give you more insight into that. But in general, frameworks provide the guidance on what to teach, how to teach, and how to access learning. They include research and further guidance on the professional development that we are to provide for our teachers so that they can feel that they are able to put in place those research-based practices along with the standards and have the instruction that is needed for our students to be able to find success. Then we get to our level, at the district level. We have a number of board policies and administrative regulations that already explicitly list the intent, the expectations, and the process for our work. What I've pulled out is just a sampling of board policies and administrative regulations that pertain specifically to instructional materials. As an attachment, you have the full scope that includes the board policy and/or administrative regulation, the description, and then I've pulled out some key highlights. So for example, we have board policy that already speaks to those academic standards that I just shared with you that come from California Department of Education. We already have board policy that speaks to our process for curriculum development and evaluation. We have board policy that speaks to multicultural education, which points out, again, similar to our statement of philosophy, that our curriculum and instruction shall reflect the perspective and experiences of various cultural, ethnic, racial, and social groups. So it's already built in as part of our board policies in terms of the guidance and direction that is needed as part of the development and approval of instructional practices. And then we even have one that speaks to controversial issues. We recognize that for our students, part of being that global citizen, part of having that success outside of their local communities or even within their local communities is that you're going to come across some controversial issues. So we actually have board policy that describes and outlines the expectations for how to teach those controversial issues within the classroom. And because of our promise of college and career readiness for all of our students, our courses, if they are to meet A through G criteria, have to adhere to the UC A through G approval process. The UC system has developed their own process that dictates to us what is needed from our part to submit courses so that they are approved to gain the classification of an A through G approved course so that the students are eligible to apply to California State Universities as well as UC universities. And so there's timelines, there's course expectations, there's submission expectations that we have to meet in accordance to their processes. And as an example, the UC system has defined criteria for the approval of world language courses. So you can see, just in that example, the expectations that the UC system has defined for how to meet the approval to be an A through G course. And you can see that there's a connection back to the world language standards, which is a CDE requirement and guideline. You could see connection to the American Council of Teachers of Foreign Language. You could see connections there in what they're looking for in terms of authentic literature, works of literature that are written and read in the target language. And you can see the various expectations that the UC system has in order for us to be able to submit our courses, and in particular our world language courses, for approval. And then going back to our internal processes, we have an instructional policies committee that is actually defined as part of board policy. And the role of this instructional policies committee is to guide, monitor, provide recommendations on curricular decisions, instructional materials. They specifically look to ensure that our instructional materials are in alignment with any new standards that may have service. And we actually look, because we're not a unified school district, there's also this expectation or this role to look at how do we collaborate with our feeder schools and our post-secondary institutions to ensure that our kids are coming into us prepared and leaving our system prepared as a result of the courses that they have taken with us. The representation within IPC isn't just administrators. We have one administrator from each site, and usually it's the Associate Principal of Educational Development. We have one teacher from each site that accompanies the Associate Principal. All our subject area coordinators for each of the designated subjects are part of the committee. We have the chairperson of the Eastside Teachers Association Curriculum Committee. And then we have the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services or designee, and then I currently act as the chair of that committee. Folks that are not listed here that do not vote, but are there to provide additional information are my Director of Instruction, my Director of Assessment and Accountability, my Director of Multi-Tier Systems of Support, as well as some teachers on special assignment. And the IPC process are actually defined by our board policies and our administrative regulations. Specifically, when addressing new curriculum proposals, we have Administrative Regulation 6143.1. So I've shared with you just the overall big picture view of our system's response as it pertains to how we develop instructional materials as well as approve them. Wanted to give you the perspective of what goes into it from all the various entities when it comes to instructional materials. So before I turn it over to Ms. Guerrero, I want to share some examples of the process. And so in the day-to-day, right, in the work that we do, we actually prepare for the process. And there are three key questions that we ask. We ask, what is the expected outcome? What are we looking to get? Is it just an adoption of a textbook? Is it a whole new framework that we have to review and look at a programmatic shift? What is the expected outcome? How do we ensure that whatever approach or plan we take to either review, select, develop, is in alignment with what we're required to be in alignment with, which is our board policies, our administrative regulations, and the guidelines and regulations as per the California Department of Education. And then we also look at what degree of expertise will be required to guide the work. So let me take you through two examples. The first one, of course, very dear and near to my heart, is the math textbook selection. So this started back in 2015. And the expected outcome was that we identify instructional materials that would be equitable, inclusive, and aligned, and that will keep the needs of all students at the forefront. At that time, just for a little bit of history, we did not have an actual textbook. Some of you were on the board when you remember the Common Core standards came, publishers weren't caught up, and so we're like, what do we do? And so we brought forth, I forget the name, a math vision project, I think it was, but it wasn't an actual textbook, right? And we were used to, right? As math teachers, like your MVP, we were used to textbooks. And so we said, okay, we want to make sure that if the textbooks is what's needed for our program to ensure our students find success, what's going to be that process? And actually, that was the first question that the math teachers posed. They said, what's going to be that process? How are we going to go through this? And then we looked at, well, who's going to lead this, right? There's a certain degree of expertise that was required to guide the work. One, given just kind of the relational aspect of it that was happening with the teachers feeling frustrated that they didn't have a textbook. And even the communities being so used to having a textbook that they were wanting to better understand this new shift into the Common Core state standards. So 2015 happened to be the first year that I left from being a principal to coming into the district in the role of director of instruction. And so when we looked at what was needed, we looked at who has knowledge of math content and skill development, who has classroom experience, who has leadership skills, because it was going to require for you to lead a whole group of teachers across the district towards one common message as well as outcome. Someone who had facilitation skills, and at that level, someone who had the authority to engage in certain agreements. So, Teresa Marquez, in the current role of Associate Superintendent of Ed Services at that time in 2015, and still now, had a bachelor's in mathematics, had taught in a high school math class for 10 years, had her master's in educational leadership from San Jose State University, and had 11 years of site admin experience at that time. And so I led the work. And so the work started with, like I mentioned, that question of, well, what's that process? Because our teachers were feeling a bit distressed over the process from before, they wanted to make sure that there was clarity around the process. And so our essential question became, well, what is that process going to look like? We know we have the board policies. We know we have the guidance from the California Department of Education, but what is it going to look like in the day-to-day, right? They wanted to know, how should materials be evaluated? What's that process, right? Let's review it. I want to know. I know what the board policy says, but how is it actually going to play out? What will the selection process look like? What do we need to know before making a decision? What information do we want from teachers who are piloting, right? So they wanted to really make sure that there was a transparent process that allowed for us to, yes, be in alignment, but also have that teacher experience brought into the process. We develop a timeline, right? For that certainty element of what are we trying to get to and by when are we trying to get to that? And then for this particular instructional materials process, because of the distress that and the frustration that some of our teachers were feeling around the new Common Core standards and what instructional materials were going to be used, they wanted to make sure that there was one message that came out together. And that message was around that process element of it. And so, yes, the technical aspect of the timeline of what does the process look like, but if we go to the next slide, looking at the messaging, they wanted to make sure that as part of the process, they understood the message so they can carry it with them. And so we make sure that they had information about and clarity around the process that was used, the background knowledge that was built prior to selection, the questions that were asked, and did all teachers have a voice? It was important for the committees, the teachers that were doing the piloting, the teachers that were visiting, the teachers who were piloting, to know that the process was followed and to be able to then message it together as one message so that there was greater success in the implementation. And to this day, we still use the book that was selected for math. The second and last example that I'd like to share with you is around a whole program review. I shared with you an example that was very specific to an instructional material, very specific to a textbook. We also, in Ed Services, do programmatic reviews. And one of those programmatic reviews that we recently did, that Ms. Guerrero actually has already come and presented to you, is around our English language development program. We started with the same questions. What is the expected outcome? How do we ensure that our plan for how to approach this is in alignment with what we're expected to do, California Department of Education and our board policies. And what is the degree of expertise that will be required to guide the work? What is needed? And where do we find that expertise? If it's not internal, where do we find it? And so for this particular situation, we partnered with an outside organization that met the level of expertise. And the next few slides just show you the process that we engaged in for a full programmatic review that began with the goal of developing a vision for our English learner education program that was grounded in high quality education and instruction. We phased it out to ensure that there was clear benchmarks or tasks to be completed, and that we had key people who needed to be involved in the review of the program. And so you could see that for this one, still in progress, Ms. Guerrero has previously shared with you. We partnered with the research firm that is outside of us because of the level of expertise that was required for this holistic program review. They've submitted their findings and recommendations, and now we're looking to put in place some of those recommendations and findings that this organization did with our own in-house expertise. And one of the things that came out of the review was the need to have a expert internally to be able to support the ongoing work. And so as a result, we have this year for the first time an ELD teacher on special assignment who actually was a classroom teacher and brings that expertise to be able to support it internally on an ongoing basis. So I shared with you the overview, the big picture of our system response as it pertains to our instructional materials. Now I'm going to ask Ms. Marta Guerrero, my Director of Instruction, who's going to guide you through our processes for a very specific project that one of our world language subject area coordinator took on specific to our Vietnamese language program. Ms. Guerrero.
Good evening, Marta Guerrero, Director of Instruction. Ms. Marquez shared with you about our district policies, the big view of district policies. What I'm going to share next is still in the same vein, which is our system response as a district, but specifically, what does the system response look like in instructional services? So we take those same questions around practices, policy, and access, but we hone it in a little bit more to the classroom. Instructional services is about the teaching and the learning, what happens in the classroom. So we talk about policies and how do they impact the learning in the classroom? What are those practices in the classroom that impact learning the most? And how do we ensure that we remove barriers and provide access to all opportunities in the classroom for our students? So we take the big vision of equity and access and just kind of bring it to those teacher and student interactions. Ms. Marquez also shared with you this picture of high quality instruction and how there are many factors that influence our work. So we have the California Department of Ed, our district board policies, the expectations of the community, as well as the expectations of the universities. So specifically for instructional services, if we really hone in and focus a little bit more, it's the Department of Education that impacts our work in the classroom as instructional services, the work of the teachers, the teaching and learning in the classroom. And that is, like Ms. Marquez explained, the frameworks for each of the subject areas that we teach, the content standards for the different classes that we offer, and then the expectation that our students will have certain skills as mandated by the state of California. So overall, we have a number of subject areas that we teach in our district. We have English, we have math, we have PE, we have science, we have performing arts, and all of those subject areas have are guided by state laws that are embedded in the Ed Code, in the California Education Code. The California Education Code tells us what we need to teach, what courses of study exist within each of these classes, within each of these subject areas. And they provide that guidance, not just in Ed Code, but also through curriculum frameworks and through content standards. They tell us, how do we teach it? How do we assess? What do we teach? And they make sure through their instructions that it is inclusive instruction. So Ms. Marquez mentioned earlier about the framework. Some very interesting things happened during the shutdown. We were all at home, but the Department of Ed kept working. The State Board of Education kept working and updating frameworks. One of the big changes was the Common Core standards. The Common Core standards were more around math, literacy, and language arts. Next came the next generation science standards. And then there are the other subject areas. And although the Common Core standards also address literacy and history and in technical subjects, we still needed content standards and frameworks for the rest of the subject areas. So visual arts, performing arts had new standards during the shutdown. And so world languages had a new framework that was published in July of 2020 while we were trying to figure out what to do with COVID. So now that things have settled down, we have a little bit of catching up to do. So the world languages framework basically provides guidance to school districts on how to implement what the state defines as high quality world languages program. They have defined for us what instruction looks like in world languages. The framework also provides guidance to teachers on how to develop the multilingual and multiliteracy skills of our students so that they can compete in the global economy, in a global society, very much like our graduate profile. They provide us with information around assessment, around strategies to use, information around how to be more inclusive in world languages so that all students, including our students with disabilities, including our English learners, can participate and access world language instruction. We also have standards. The framework is the big picture. The standards actually outline what each level of world languages should cover, the type of skills that we should be teaching. They tell us the knowledge, the concepts, and the skills that every student has to acquire if they're enrolled in a world languages class and what that looks like at each level. I have included for you a message from our State Superintendent of Public Schools, as well as the President of the State Board of Education. It's at the beginning of the World Languages Standards, and they basically encapsulate in that message what the expectation is. And if I may read to you, it is about developing communication skills, interpersonal skills, interpretive skills, and presentational skills. But most importantly, these skills are essential for our students to effectively navigate the international marketplace, interact meaningfully across cultures, and succeed in business, research, and international relations. And as we read that, and the reason I highlighted it is because it aligns beautifully with our graduate profile. When you're looking about communication, we want our students to be communicators. We want our students to be critical thinkers. And in that latter part of their message, we want our students to be able to navigate the marketplace, to interact meaningfully. That requires critical thinking. We want our students to be collaborators, creators, community members, and all of that is part of the world languages standards, the expectation of what world language teachers should be doing in the classroom. So, world language standards. I'm going to give you a little brief description of what they are, because I think that information is relevant to the conversation that we're currently having. There are a total of 13 standards for world language, but they have been put into 3 categories. And the main categories are communication, cultures, and connections. Communication standards. It is the expectation of the state of California that in world languages classes, our students engage in real world communication, that they do so in authentic settings, in real world settings, and that they do so, and that these world settings, these authentic settings represent what a student will experience in a target culture. The target culture is the cultures where the language that their student is studying is spoken. So if I'm learning Spanish, then I should be able to function in authentic settings using real world communication, whether I'm in Mexico, whether I'm in Spain, whether I'm in Peru, whether I'm in Cuba, whether I'm in northern Mexico or southern Mexico, whether I'm in California or whether I'm in Florida, anywhere where the language is spoken. The second category is cultures. We have 4 standards under cultures. And I highlighted everything that I have in green actually comes directly from our world languages standards. Students must acquire, this is not an option, they must acquire the ability to interact appropriately with target culture bearers, people from other cultures. So whether if I'm learning German, then I need to know how to speak to the people from Luxembourg or Belgium or wherever German is spoken. If I'm learning Japanese, right? Any other countries where Japanese is the main language, only one has an official language of Japanese, but there are Japanese people in a lot of other countries, and I should be able to communicate with them. That they should be able to use culturally, Mr. Vandersteen, go back. That they should be able to use culturally appropriate language, because the language from here is different from the language from there, but it's still the target language that our students are learning. So that a student should know that in Colombia, you say this, but in Venezuela, they say that. But if you go to Spain, you need to know how to say that. And that they should engage in comparisons among cultures. And that's part of that critical thinking, that they should be able to understand the perspectives, the products like food, music, culture, literature, magazines, books from different cultures, and that they should be able to understand the practices and perspectives of all the different cultures, all the different people who speak the language that you're studying. Next. And lastly, under connections, that our students should be able to learn to address different topics at different levels of complexity with different speakers of the language, and learn how to make connections and see comparisons between different cultures, different perspectives that are all related to the language that they're speaking. That's the mandate from the state of California. There's also another layer, part of both the framework and of the standards for world languages, and that is that they're very conscious that not all languages are the same. If you look to the right, I have highlighted in pink the languages that we teach in this district. The Foreign Service that teaches their ambassadors, their people who they send abroad, their soldiers, to learn a new language, have developed a category system of languages based on how different they are to the English language and how many hours it takes for them to learn it. So you have languages that are category 1, which is French and Spanish, the 2 of the languages that we speak. It takes about 600 to 750 hours to be proficient, to be able to have some type of expertise in the reading, writing, speaking, listening of a language. Whereas you have German, which is a category 2, Vietnamese is a category 3, it takes about 1,100 hours. And then category 4 is Chinese Mandarin, as well as Japanese languages that we offer. So they provide this information because although we have one framework and we have one set of standards, the rate at which students can progress through a language varies depending on the language that they're learning, and teachers need to be aware of that. So they provide this so that we have reasonable expectations for student performance year after year. So we don't say you're taking Spanish, you're going to be at this proficiency level, and then we have the same expectation of our students who are Chinese or taking Chinese or Japanese, because that takes longer when you're an English speaker. This information also helps us with placement, articulation, and with creation of programs. One last phase is we talk about proficiency in world languages. There is actually a scale, and it comes from the American Council for the Teaching of Foreign Languages. It's called ACFL, and ACFL is listed both in the framework and in the standards. And they tell us if you are learning a category 1 language, it's going to take you about 700 hours, which is about what 4 years of high school are, right? 700 and something hours. And you should be at this level after 4 years of study, right? Intermediate mid, intermediate low, which is about the middle of that diamond that you see there. But if you are learning a category 3 or a category 4, then your proficiency level is going to be a little bit different, right? So that's what guides our work, the standards, the framework, keeping in mind the proficiency ranges, keeping in mind how long it takes to learn a new language. So this is all information that teachers need to know when they're teaching a foreign language. So we looked at the policies. So what does that look like? Who's actually doing the work here? What are the practices that go along with this policy? Well, the work is led by subject area coordinators. Subject area coordinators are teachers on special assignment. They're bargaining unit members, and their job is to lead teachers in this work. They assist teachers, they coordinate and evaluate the curriculum and the instructional programs. They help develop and implement curriculum that's consistent with the standards, consistent with the university's expectations, consistent with the state of California. They establish criteria, they oversee the selection of materials, and they update course descriptions. That's the work of a subject area coordinator. My role in instructional services, if you look to the right, as a district administrator, it's basically to assist, to supervise, to answer questions, to monitor, and to ensure that the work of all the subject area coordinators is aligned. But my job is to support the people who actually do the work are the teachers. So we have 13 subject area coordinators. The subject, let me catch up to myself. We have 13 subject area coordinators. And to give you a glimpse of what they do this year, currently they're engaged in learning. We're reading a book together. We're reading Grading for Equity because we realize there are a lot of teachers in this district who are reading Grading for Equity and we were behind. And since they're leading teachers, they need to read it. So this is part of what we do when we meet, we debrief different chapters of the book. We also have started to read the Ethnic Studies Framework because we have a graduation requirement looming. And there's a lot of unease among some of our teachers as to how is that gonna impact my elective class? When you add a new graduation requirement, so that we would all have the same understanding, we're reading the Ethnic Studies Framework together. We also collaborate. They collaborate to create district processes. You saw a presentation on the process for the priority standards. That's part of the work that they do. They chair meetings, they chair committees, they lead work groups, they run their department chair meetings, they lead professional development, and then they have goals and projects they work with that they come up with every year. On the right-hand side is a copy of the spreadsheet that they fill out at the beginning of the year to tell me, what are you working on this year? I know what the big district projects are. What else are you working on? And so they tell me this during monthly meetings. I meet with all the SACs once a month, and then I meet with them on one-to-one meetings to kind of keep up with the work and support them as we go along. And because there are questions about world languages, I wanted to share with you where the Vietnamese program came into the conversation. So last spring, when I met with the World Languages SAC, we talked about what her work was going to be this year so she could start planning. And we settled on the fact that she would be leading, continue to lead the work around creating summative assessments. They are the groups of teachers from all the languages that we teach are creating end of semester tests aligned to the framework of an AP exam, so we can start preparing the kids from the beginning in whether it's Spanish 1 or Japanese 3 or Vietnamese 2 or whatever language they're studying. She was going to continue with the identification of the priority standards, just like the other SACs. She was going to coordinate the seal of biliteracy testing for Vietnamese. We normally use the advanced placement test, the AP exam, for seal of biliteracy for all the other languages, but because there is no AP exam in Chinese and Vietnamese, there's actually a company that has been approved by ACFL, that American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, to give proficiency tests in Vietnamese so that the kids can can earn the seal of biliteracy in Vietnamese. So she's helping coordinate that. And then when we were talking about, we have a new framework that just came out in 2020. Now we need to start aligning course descriptions. Where do we get started? I can tell you that the Visual Arts SAC has already started updating Art 1. In fact, we're going to submit it to the UC, aligned to the new standards. Our Science SAC is working with a group of teachers to have a new course description for the Living Earth Essentials, not biology, Living Earth. not chemistry, but chemistry, oh, it has a different title, I forgot. But we're having to do the same thing for world languages. And I'm the one who asked her that before we get that moving, we needed to update the load level of the Vietnamese for Heritage Speakers classes, because that work has been pending for a long time. And since we're going to, in order to update the load level, we need to rewrite the course descriptions. We were going to start there. And I'll explain in a minute what that actually means, because it's not a common vocabulary word, load value. So a little background. These are the world languages programs that we offer in the district. The ones in green are for non-heritage speakers, kids who are learning a second language. Like I learned French, right? Not my home language, I'm learning it from scratch. Those are our standard programs. We offer American Sign Language, we offer Chinese, French, German, Japanese, Spanish, and Vietnamese, which is our newest standard program in world languages. You notice that the majority of those standard programs have 1, 2, 3, and an AP level class. That's because the College Board has an advanced placement course that goes with that language. They do not have one for American Sign Language, so there is no AP. And the process of creating the courses in Vietnamese did not complete the process. They stopped before level 4, so that work still needs to get done. We do not have a level 4 in Vietnamese standard. We have our Heritage Speakers program at the bottom. We have 3 programs, Chinese Heritage, which I think we adopted sometime in 2013, 14, something like that. And then Spanish for Heritage Speakers, which our district has had since the 1980s. And then the Vietnamese Heritage that we adopted in the 1990s. So those are the programs that we have. So what does load value have to do with this? Load value, it means language other than English. And it is the value that every course has after a year of study. So if I am taking German 1, the value of my course is 1. If I am taking Japanese 3, the value of my course is 3 years of study. So that if I start as a freshman and I take Japanese 3, the university system says, you've already taken 3 years of world language study. You don't need to take 3, 4, 5, and 6. A Japanese 3, you have 3 years of study. You've met the admission requirements for the universities. So every year has a course. It's based, every course has a year and a value. Very traditional, 4 years of study, low value of 4. 3 years of study, low value of 3. That's what it's always been. When I was a teacher, I taught traditional courses. So all my courses had a 1, 2, 3, or 4 value. Simple as that. But then came the Heritage Speakers courses. The Heritage Speakers courses started in this district with Spanish in the mid to late 80s, thanks to the work of teachers at Overfeld High School. And I'm going to say her name because I think sometimes we forget who the pioneers were. Irene Silvas at Overfeld High School and Cecilio Testa began the Spanish for Heritage Speakers program because they felt that the native speakers did not fit anywhere in the Spanish 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So for years, we had Spanish 1, Spanish 2, Spanish 3, Spanish 4 for Heritage, value 1, 2, 3, 4. I had the opportunity to teach all those courses, and then I became a subject area coordinator. And one of my first tasks was to clean up a little problem we had as a district. And the little problem we had at that point, school sites had access to update the UC website. And different people decided that since heritage speakers spoke more Spanish than non-heritage, then the classes were probably worth more than 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we had classes, Spanish for heritage speakers classes that were worth load 2 over here and load 3 over there and load 1 over there. So I met with the associate principals. I think this was like 2003, 2004. And I told them that I would help clean up. So former world language teacher, former Spanish for heritage program teacher. I met with groups of teachers, we read the framework, and we rewrote the course descriptions, submitted them to the UC system, and they approved our Spanish for Heritage Speakers 1 as a year 3 course. So the load value of Spanish for Heritage Speakers 1 now have the worth of 3 years. And so if you see our Spanish for Heritage Speakers load values, if the first year is worth 3, the next year is worth 4 plus. I left that position to become a site administrator and did not do the work for Vietnamese speakers. So that work has been hanging there for a while, needing to get done, which is the reason that when the SAC and I were speaking about this year's work, I asked her to please tackle this. So currently, Heritage Speaker Spanish has a different load value than Vietnamese. Vietnamese has the traditional load value, like for a standard class, not for a heritage. So that needs to be updated. So when we met, we asked ourselves, like, again, questions. What do we need to do? What is this going to look like? What do we want to do? What's going to be our outcome? And our outcome is to update the load value of our Vietnamese for Heritage Speakers courses so that our kids get the same, get the credit on their transcript, the credit that they deserve. We don't know what that level is that they're going to get credit for, but we want to make sure we get that done. How do we ensure our plan is aligned for how to approach? So we have to make sure that it's aligned to the new framework that came out in 2020, the new standards that came out in 2019, and that it's aligned to board policies. Thankfully, as part of IPC, we've been reviewing board policies around curriculum development. So we kind of got that one down. It was the other two. And then what degree of expertise do we need? Our world languages SAC has a lot of expertise around framework and standards. She's been doing this work for a long time. However, neither she nor I knew the new framework nor the new standards. So we met regularly to read them. We actually read the framework and the standards so that we know what the heck is in there so that we can then guide the work, right? The part we do not have was a Vietnamese teacher who was also familiar with this, who can help support the language part of it. The expertise of our world languages teachers is different when they teach Vietnamese than when they teach another one of the languages, and that is through nobody's fault. It has to do with majors. When I become a Spanish teacher, I am first a Spanish major or a French major or a German major. Those are traditional programs. Universities know what to do with that. But really, there are no major programs for Vietnamese. There are Vietnamese courses at some universities, but the major is Asian studies or global studies. But the type of major in Vietnamese is not there, which means that when I become a teacher and I go get a credential, I have to get a credential in something else and then take a test to become a Vietnamese teacher, which is kind of what I had to do for Spanish. So let me kind of tell you how that goes. All universities have a list of courses that you take to get a major, and I took all of them for French. So I was ready. All I had to do was go to a credential program and I have my credential to teach French. But I didn't take all of them for Spanish, even though I'm a Spanish speaker and I'm a native Spanish speaker. So I actually had to take the National Teachers Exam. That was a long time ago. Now it's called CSET. In order to be able to teach Spanish, because I didn't have the right coursework to do that. And because the universities don't offer the right coursework for Vietnamese, our Vietnamese teachers have to take a test. They don't go through the traditional path. So we know we have some work to do to support them because they're dedicated to the language, but the preparation is different. So they have excellent preparation in math or social studies, but they didn't get the opportunity to go through that world languages credentialing program that other world languages teachers do. So we need somebody with that type of experience. Plus, even though we read the framework and even though we read the standards, this one threw us. Go back, yeah, the one that you had, the next one. Yeah. This one threw us. How does this proficiency of Vietnamese impact the load value when it's a harder language to learn? What is the proficiency level? We really do need someone who understands proficiency levels and understands the Vietnamese language to help us do this. because we know what it is for category 1 and category 2 languages because we speak them. But how does it being a harder language impact the load value? We don't have the answer for that. Luckily, we have a great resource in our own backyard. The state of California in Ed Code has authorized what they call subject matter projects. So there is a science project, a California science project, a California world language project, a history project, a PE project, because this is the way that the Department of Education supports instruction. They're like the local resource on framework and standards. So the world language project is located in Stanford. They have regional projects. We have one right in our backyard. So the Stanford World Language Project gets federal and state grants. You can find their information on the CDE website, the California Department of Education website. And luckily for us, we have been partnering with them for about 25 years. They have provided professional development to our world languages teachers, starting with one of our longest serving subject area coordinators, Lorraine D'Ambrosio, who brought him on as to help us. They supported the beginning Spanish for Heritage Speakers teachers when we started the program. In fact, the guy who trained us from this project back in the 90s is the one person that it gets quoted throughout the framework and throughout the standards as an expert in the field. So we're very lucky, those of us who were trained by him. And they have also provided training to our ELD teachers, because learning a second language parallels an ELD program and a world language program. The ELD program gets accelerated because they're living in an English-speaking country, right? So the Stanford World Language Project is also the group that guided our district between 2014 and 2017 to create the standard Vietnamese program. So we were familiar with them and because they helped us at that time. So between 2014 and 2017, they work with our World Languages SAC, a 3-person team, the director of the Stanford World Language Project, who, by the way, is also named in the framework. Very nice, and they thank him for all his work. One of our retired world language teachers, and then they did a nationwide search for someone with the expertise they were looking for to bring the Vietnamese language expertise along with the world languages expertise. And so the work that they provided was, they provided, first of all, professional development for the Vietnamese teachers so that they could engage meaningfully in the work that they were going to get engaged in. Remember, that Vietnamese major piece and credentialing piece is unfortunately not there right now anywhere for our Vietnamese teachers. They also led the district teachers in creating the scope and sequence, the curriculum maps for Vietnamese 1, 2, and 3. And they helped write the course descriptions that were submitted to the UC system so that they could become college prep classes, and they got accepted and adopted. So that was because we had them. Go back to that, Mr. Vanderzee. When when the World Languages SAC and I met in the spring to talk about how we were going to update the load, the answer was pretty simple for us. We already have experts who know us. We already have people who know the language, know the world languages standards, who are familiar with all of this. But instead of going through a much more expensive venue of actually hiring the World Language Project, we contracted directly with the consultant who had been there for 3 years in the district doing this work. And just before I forget, I'm sorry, Mr. Vanderzee, if you could go back. No, it's me. The scope of the work was the curriculum maps, the scope and sequence, what to teach and in what order. And it was the course descriptions. It was not the lessons. They provided the resources that met the requirements of the standards and the frameworks, which is open the world to the kids. They should be able to function anywhere in the world, talking to anybody, using different vocabulary, different information to be able to talk to the target culture bearers anywhere in the world. So that's what their lens is. Their lens is the standards and the framework. The actual lessons were not created by them. Those were teacher created, and they were created using some of the resources that were brought to them. So just next one. So we got to work in the summer and the subject area coordinator did a lot of the prep work. And we were able to submit a contract, hiring the consultant in September. We met, and by we, I mean me, I mean the subject area coordinator and the consultant, but with the Vietnamese teachers, about 7 or 8 of them who teach heritage speakers, to explain the work, how we were going to go about it, the reason behind it. I know some of them because I worked with them when I was a SAC myself about, 17 years ago or so. And then in November, classroom visits were conducted, surveys were given, writing samples were collected, oral proficiency recordings were made so that we could determine the level of proficiency of our Vietnamese students right now, so that we know more or less where the load value is, so then it can guide us in writing the course descriptions that would need to be submitted with an updated load value. So next one. And I just want to make sure that we kind of clarify, we keep talking about instructional materials and the consultant is reviewing the instructional materials. The Ed Code actually has a very clean definition of what instructional materials are. And it's not just one thing. It's actually printed materials, non-printed materials, textbooks, technology-based materials. Any type of educational material is considered an instructional material. And so COVID also changed that a little bit, because we were so used to having textbooks and then we were home and we needed online stuff. So there's so much more online resources. And for world languages in particular, where you're supposed to access the world outside of us so that you know how to relate to it, so you can be a global citizen and work in other countries and relate to people. Online materials become key because you're able to download authentic articles, you're able to download authentic interactions. I watch French shows, crime shows, because I get to practice my French and all I have to do is click on something, right? Stuff is there. So instructional materials, the meaning is changing a little bit. It's not just a hard copy of something. So our next steps are in this process is to receive the results of the review. We are expecting a report, kind of like I don't know how sophisticated or how long, but kind of like we did for ELD, with findings. This is what I find, and these are my recommendations. This World Languages SAC and I came up with our own preliminary plan of where we thought we were going, but it's not until we see the findings that we know what our next steps are. We know for sure that it has to include providing intensive professional development to all our Vietnamese teachers so that they are familiar with both the standards and the framework, as well as the actual proficiency ranges. Because part of world language instruction is I need to know at what level of instruction you are in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And those ranges of proficiency come from ACFL. So we need to make sure that they know how to do that. We had our subject area coordinator in world languages, and I know that there's that gap that we need to fill. And just like we have for ELD, where we needed an ELD SAC and an ELD TOSA, we know that we also need someone who can help us with the Vietnamese language, because there's a lot of work that needs to get done. And although our world languages SAC can help with process, the actual review of the information takes longer. And I can tell you how much longer it takes. I mentioned earlier that they're engaged in writing end of semester exams. So the Vietnamese teachers who have participated get trained, they write the test, and then they have to translate it for Ms. Escobedo to be able to read it and say, yeah, this is a DOK 3, this is at this level of proficiency, this is not. And then they have to put it back, and then they have to fix it. And when they fix it, they translate it, because we don't yet have that expertise, right? Whereas we have it in Spanish, we have it in French, we have it in German. In fact, our German teacher is a nationally board certified teacher. We have expertise in other languages. And right now it's taking longer for Vietnamese because of that. We need to write a new scope and sequence, and we also need to write new course descriptions to submit them to the UC system with an updated load value. And then we can talk about what kind of materials do we need now that we know what proficiency level we are at, now that we know where we want our students to move from one level to the next. So before I turn the presentation over to Ms. Marquez so that she can close out the presentation. I just wanted to thank you, and I'm very glad to have the opportunity to share the work of our department, because what I just shared with you about world languages is being replicated in a different form in each one of the other 13 subject areas that we have in our district. I want to assure you that we are committed to following the same process for all subject areas, that we are aware of our responsibility to follow board policy, and to ensure that we know the frameworks and the standards for each of the subject areas that we teach. I have included my contact information because I want to make sure that if there's a question, if there's a concern, if there is an issue that needs to be resolved, that I'm contacted, not just by our own district staff, but also by parents, by community members, by students. I'd be happy to talk to them about our current instructional program. So if there's questions about teaching and learning, if there's questions about instructional materials, about trainings or workshops to support our staff, my contact information is there. I'd be happy to talk to anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Guerrero. So to close out our presentation, just want to make sure that I bring it back to that bigger picture, that we recognize that although we have guidelines and curriculums from our California Department of Education, we have our board policies, we have our own internal processes and practices. We know that there's areas of growth for our processes for how we develop and improve our instruction materials, which include looking at our board policies and AMID regs, the consistency and frequency of how we report the recommendations from IPC to the board, inclusion of parents and students, looking at further clarity with our Instructional Policies Committee manual, and ensuring that the communication is there that includes the rationale, the process, and the opportunities for input and involvement. So part of our work in terms of future plans and next steps is to specifically address those areas of growth that we have identified. And so we'll be bringing to you some board policies that will need updating. We'll have to prioritize them given the number of board policies that are currently in existence. There's a lot of changes that have come, as Ms. Guerrero has mentioned. Even when you look at just the new frameworks and the new standards, our board policies have to be updated to reflect that. We want to make sure that we build further capacity within our staff. That includes our administrators, certificated and classified staff, in terms of the standards, the framework, and the instructional strategies and interventions, to look at it beyond just the instructional materials aspect of it, but as a whole aspect of high quality instruction. We want to make sure that we look at what were those current textbooks or courses that are on pilot status, and make sure that the board is aware of those. And so that we have that greater frequency of bringing to you more information about those instructional materials that are either revised or are brought forth as new instructional materials. We want to make sure that our Instructional Policies Committee recommendations align to board meeting calendars, so that when there is something new that comes forth through IPC, we're able to bring them forth as part of an update to the board. We want to make sure that we review existing structures so that we can look at where are those opportunities to include our students and our parents so that they can become active partners. It's part of this process. We want to make sure that we set a timeline so that we can get that IPC manual completed and clarified. As new frameworks come about, as new standards come about, some of our forms that we've been using are outdated. They don't reflect the needs of bringing forth new curriculum processes, new instructional materials, processes for approval and development. And of course, develop a plan for communication that will allow us to ensure that all stakeholders, whether it's internally as well as our community, are aware of their opportunities for input. And to close, I just want to bring it back to what I started with at the beginning, that really this is about us looking at how we keep that promise of all students graduating prepared for college and career. This is one aspect of it. Our instructional policies are one aspect of it. Our instructional materials are one piece of this greater component of assuring that high quality instruction that meets the wellness, behavior, and academic needs of all our students. So to close, I want to thank you as a board. I want to thank the community for bringing forth the questions that have been raised, yes, for a specific program, but that have really allowed us to be able to share with our community and your board what our overarching processes are. I'm super thankful that we actually have board policy that speaks to what we're hoping to do, that speaks to what we're wanting to build as part of our educational program. And that's one that is filled with opportunities for educational programs for our students that are going to lead to active citizenship, that we're going to be able to encourage their achievement in a society that is continuously changing. And again, just want to point out to how aligned that statement of educational philosophy is to our overarching goal of building equitable communities. And so again, similar to Ms. Guerrero sharing her contact information, as the Associate Superintendent of Ed Services, I am always open to questions, concerns that are raised that have to do with not only instructional materials, but anything that has to do with our effort and our work to build high quality instruction in Eastside Union High School District. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions or comments that the board may have. And I want to just thank you for listening to our, yes, very long presentation, but wanted to make sure that you had the full picture and full context of the work that we do in Ed Services specific to instructional material. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Very thorough. So I'd like to, let's see, we have a few comments here from our public. So why don't we start off with that if we're okay with that, colleagues? Okay, great. So our first speaker, if you could come up, Tran Vu. You have Tran Vu? Did I pronounce your name correctly? Okay, please come up to microphone. I want to make sure. So if you can
Okay.
make sure that it's green, the microphone,
Yeah,
is it green?
they
Okay,
got a
great.
green color in here.
Great. So you will have 2 minutes to
2
speak.
minutes.
And if you
Okay.
can start with stating your name for the record, please.
Oh, sure. Yes. So, dear board member and Mr. Superintendent, my name is Vu Tran. I thank you for your prompt reply to my email. Teacher has been told me that over the years, the Spanish program has been funded to update the textbook and instructional material, but can speak Vietnamese. This is an equity issue. To be fair, I would like to suggest that the Eastside Union High School District be given funding to Vietnamese teacher who will be able to update the Tiếng Việt mến yêu textbook series. This textbook must be updated by Vietnamese teacher in the school district with extensive experience, knowledge, standard, and well understanding of the Vietnamese community. Our community is always looking for support and trust. We always support through our votes to our friends. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, our next speaker, Ngoc Dung. You? Ngoc You. Is that how you pronounce your name, ma'am? You. Ngoc You. Okay, welcome. You will have 2 minutes. If you could start with stating your name for the record, please. Oh, 4 minutes.
Gửi cái lời phát biểu của tôi đến quý vị. Kính thưa Hội đồng Quản trị và Giám đốc học khu, tôi là Ngọc Dung. Tôi là cư dân, là cử tri, là người đóng thuế tại San Jose. Hôm nay tôi xin phát biểu một vấn đề quan trọng liên quan đến Bộ sách giáo khoa tiếng Việt mến yêu.
Excuse me, please.
Bộ sách
Madam
giáo khoa này
President.
do
Madam President, for the sake of the listening audience, it's best to speak more into the microphone. We can hear you, but they would have trouble hearing you.
Ở đâu sạc ra em? Dạ. Kính thưa Hội đồng Quản trị, Giám đốc học khu, tôi là Ngọc Dung. Tôi là cư dân, là cử tri, là người đóng thuế tại thành phố San Jose. Hôm nay tôi xin phát biểu một vấn đề quan trọng đến bộ sách giáo khoa tiếng Việt mến yêu hiện đang sử dụng trong học khu Eastside. Bộ sách giáo khoa tiếng Việt được soạn thảo rất là công phu do các giáo sư có nhiều năm kinh nghiệm trước năm 1975 tại Việt Nam, Việc soạn rất là công phu, phù hợp với mục đích dạy tiếng Việt cho học sinh lớn lên tại Mỹ. Bộ sách này là nhờ vào cái chương trình tiếng Việt ở học khu ESUHSD xin cái ngân khoản của Bộ Giáo dục Hoa Kỳ tại thủ đô Washington DC để hoàn thành cái bộ sách này trong nhiều năm qua. Chương trình tiếng Việt mến yêu đã mang thêm ngân khoản tài chánh cho học khu ESUHSD và phổ biến cho các học khu khác. Cái chương trình tiếng Việt mến yêu này đã được các học khu khác đặt mua và giảng dạy. Hôm nay tôi xin trực tiếp đặt câu hỏi với ông giám đốc học khu ESUHSD. Câu thứ nhất, trong 20 năm qua, học khu ESUHSD đã chi bao nhiêu ngân sách để mua tiếng Việt, tiếng Tây Ban Nha và tiếng Pháp? Lý do gì hơn 20 năm qua học khu không cấp ngân khoản nào cho thầy cô giáo trong học khu cập nhật sách giáo khoa tiếng Việt, biên soạn sách mới cho người học tiếng Việt phù hợp với các học sinh sống tại Mỹ, phù hợp với văn hóa của người Mỹ gốc Việt tại San Jose? Câu thứ ba, tại sao không có đại diện của một giáo sư người Việt trong học khu ESUHSD trong ủy ban Instructional Policy Committee? Tôi đề nghị Hội đồng Quản trị và ông Tổng Giám đốc nhanh chóng phê duyệt ngân khoản để cập nhật bộ sách giáo khoa tiếng Việt mến yêu của học khu và soạn thêm bộ sách bổ sung cho học sinh mới học tiếng Việt trong học khu. Sách giáo khoa được cập nhật và biên soạn bởi các thầy cô giáo người Việt của học khu với nhiều kinh nghiệm, kiến thức và sự hiểu biết về cộng đồng người Việt tị nạn tại San Jose. Về vấn đề này, quan trọng cho phụ huynh, học sinh và cộng đồng người Việt tị nạn cộng sản tại San Jose. Đây là một sự bất công, không công bằng đối với chương trình tiếng Việt và đối với cộng đồng người Việt tại San Jose. Xin cảm ơn tất cả quý vị lắng nghe và hỗ trợ. Xin kính chào quý vị.
Thank you. Thank you, Nak. Will you translate? It's essentially this. Okay. We can't hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, so now we'll be
Okay.
translating.
Oh, no. Okay. So she said, Dear Board of Trustee and Superintendent, my name is Ngọc Dung. I am a resident, voter, and taxpayer of the city of San Jose. Today, I would like to address an important issue related to the Tiếng Việt Mến Yêu textbook series currently being used in the high school, in the Eastside Union High School District. This set of textbook has been collaborated by a professor with many years of experience in pedagogy in Vietnam before 1975 and linguists of the Vietnamese refugee community in the United States. The compilation is very elaborate and suitable for the purpose of teaching Vietnamese to the Vietnamese student growing up in the US. This book series was made possible in large by the effort of the Eastside School District Tiếng Việt program in its effort to obtain funding from the United States Department of Education in Washington over the past several years to complete in the series. This set of the beloved Vietnamese textbook has been ordered by many school districts in the United States and used as a textbook for teaching in schools in the school districts. The Vietnamese language program has brought in money for the Eastside School District for the dissemination and distribution of this textbook. This is a joy and pride for the Eastside High School District and in particular, the Vietnamese community in the San Jose in general. Recently, the Eastside School District has tried to change this textbook series with books from the Vietnam that use methods and words that are completely inappropriate for the Vietnamese students in the US. During the last meeting, many members of the Vietnamese refugee community in the San Jose strongly protested and demanded that the Eastside High School District Board of Trustees immediately stop these false documents. So today I would like to ask a few questions directly to the superintendent. Question number one, over the past 20 years, how much of the budget has the district spent on the Spanish and French textbooks? Question number 2, what is the reason that over the past 20 years, the Eastside School District has not spent any money for the teachers in the district to update the Vietnamese language textbooks and develop a new series for newcomers to learn Vietnamese and be suitable for them in terms of culturally appropriate for the Vietnamese American in San Jose? And question number 3 is, why is it that we do not have a representation of a Vietnamese instructor in the Eastside Union High School District for the IPC committee? And I urge the Board of Trustees and the Superintendent to promptly approve the budget to update the district Vietnamese tiếng Việt Minh Yêu textbook series and develop additional series for the Vietnamese students in the Eastside Union High School District. The textbook must be updated and developed by a team of Vietnamese teachers of the Eastside Union High School District with extensive experience, knowledge, standards, and understanding of the local Vietnamese community. This is an important issue to the Vietnamese parents, students, and the community, and unfair treatment to the Vietnamese language program. So thank you all for your attention and support. Best regard, Ngọc Dung.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so I want to acknowledge the time. I recognize that we don't have a lot of speakers, so I was a little bit more flexible, but if we can please stick to our time so that we could respect everybody's time here tonight and get through our agenda. Our next speaker is Michael Dulong. Oh, wait, no. Sorry, that's a different item. Hong Dong. I would love for you to tell me how we pronounce your name accurately, sir. How do you say your name? Can you speak into the mic, please? I think you could. There we go. Lift it up a little bit. Closer to you.
Okay,
There we go. Your name, sir?
my name is Han Jung.
Hong Ju.
I'm a parent and also the president of Viet Press USA Daily News and Network. Last time at your meeting on the 12th of January, I told you that my son, a former student of your district, he learned Vietnamese from the textbook tiếng Việt Minh Yêu, and now he can speak and write Vietnamese very good. So that now I heard that you intend to throw away this textbook to use another source of the Vietnamese from other people. And I think that it is not good. I'm a writer. I'm editor-in-chief of Vietnamese Daily News. I read this textbook and I confirm that it is a very well written. So that, you know that teacher told me that during last 20 years, you never purchase any Vietnamese textbook. Why you spend a lot of money to buy the textbook from Spanish, from France? This is not fair. And I want to ask Ms. Musquet that your IPC, you don't have any Vietnamese educator. Why is this? I hope that you will allocate a fund to upgrade the Vietnamese textbook tiếng Việt Minh Yêu. This is the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight and speaking in person. We really appreciate it. Do we have any other comments that were submitted online?
There are no online public comments.
Okay, on Zoom, Superintendent Van Der Zee? No.
No.
Okay. All right, colleagues, discussion. Comments, questions
Yes.
for our presenters today?
First of all, I would like to say thank you to all committee members who join us today for looking at presentations, as well as those committee member who wrote one of those email to us. And I have to say that with Associate Superintendent Ms. Marcus and Director of World Language, Ms. Guerrero, did very comprehensive, very in-depth presentation. And I'm really, understand a bit more the process because I have no idea. Now you really open another avenue so I can understand it a bit more. My first question for you is first, as I know that the book Tin Việt Minh Yêu, are we still using this book?
Yes, we currently are still using that book.
Okay. But we have not updated, am I correct?
Correct. We have not updated that textbook, and that is part of the process that Ms. Guerrero has explained as to getting to the LOT and submitting it. The instructional materials come after. But
Okay.
currently, that is the book that is being used.
I see. And I heard that we did sell this book to some other district in Southern California, as well as another district. Did we bring some revenue back to our district?
We did. I don't know the exact numbers. We'd have to go and check what the actual numbers were in terms of the revenue. But one of the questions actually that was recently posed by a requesting district was if this book was currently updated to the new world languages framework as well as the standards, and we had to say no.
I see. All right. From another question that I know that when we talk about on the slide number 39, it takes 1,100 class hours for an English native speaker to be proficient in Vietnamese, but it takes 2,200 class hours for the same person to be proficient in Chinese. Are those we identify, or this is a source of the world language, or how do we determine that?
That information comes from the US government, from the Foreign Service. So whenever they are sending soldiers or they are sending ambassadors or people to work in other countries, they put them through a training program to learn the new language. So in the slide, and I can send you much more detailed information, it quotes the source as the US Foreign Service.
That's
And it's
interesting.
actually quoted directly then in the standards and in the framework. You find that information there as well.
Wow. Well, that's interesting because I'm surprised how many hours that become a proficiency, to that. The Vietnamese Heritage Speaker Program has a lower load value than the Spanish and Chinese for Heritage Speaker Program. You already explained, but I was wondering why that at the time we was, evaluated as a Spanish Heritage Speaker Course 1 to equal to load value 3, and Chinese for Heritage Speaker Course 1 also equal to load value 2, but Vietnamese for Heritage Speaker Course 1 only has load value 1.
So when we first started the Heritage Speakers programs, the load value of those courses was exactly the same as the one for the standard courses. The conversation really about changing the load value came probably in the early 2000s. And I was able to start the work because the question came from the APEDs, the associate principals, around Spanish. So that was actually my first task to get that done for Spanish. But then the work did not get done for Vietnamese. And I believe that there was an issue around 2012 or 11 when I was an APED that because school sites still had the ability to make changes to the courses, there was a belief among some of our associate principals and our counselors that if Spanish was worth this, then Vietnamese must be also worth that. even though none of the work had been done to make the alignment. So it is my understanding that one of the first things that needed to get done was to make sure that the Vietnamese heritage speakers were reset to the appropriate load value, but the work to get the load value updated did not get done back in 2012. I think at that time they were working on the Chinese courses. There was the new Chinese heritage courses. And then when the conversation came back around to updating the load value around 2014, there was a conversation among the Vietnamese teachers that the need was the heritage speakers courses because the number of that the need was the standard courses because the number of students who were heritage speakers was not the same, and that what we needed to do is first create a standard program, and then we would be able to then take some of the students who were not really heritage speakers that were in the heritage program and then move to the standard, and then the next set of work would get done. The slowness of the process has to do with the time that the subject area coordinators have to do this type of work. Not all the subject area coordinators are released full-time. We have full-time release in English, math, and science. And the world languages coordinator, when I was a world languages coordinator and I did the work for Spanish, I only had 2 periods a day to do this, and I was in the classroom the rest of the time. Currently, our subject area coordinator teaches part of the day and does this as part of her assignment. So the work does go a little bit slower. So if you have one project like growing or creating an extra course in American Sign Language or Chinese, and something else has to be put aside because they don't have a lot all day to get this work moving.
So after this presentation or after the work, you develop the instructional materials, then the load value of the Vietnamese heritage speaker will be equivalent from load 1, 2, 3, 2? Or how does it work? And when the process gonna start, it's gonna take what, maybe another 6 months or another year? And the student who took this Vietnamese language speaker gonna have to suffer because we as make the policy that could not transfer enough time for them to receive the same value of other students.
You're correct. The process is slow in order to do it right. So you were asking, how does it get done? We're starting with evaluating the current proficiency of our students in the heritage speakers classes. So there were proficiency interviews, there were writing samples to find out at what level of proficiency, if you remember the levels of proficiency here with the diamond, the upside down diamond, are they at a novice level? Are they at an intermediate level? Where are they currently, and where do we want them to be? I don't know what the proficiency level because of the added layer that Vietnamese is a much more difficult language because it's so much different than English, right? So we're talking about the language hours that it would take an English speaker to learn. So once we know that, it will give us an idea and say, oh, most of the kids are at a level 2, or most of the kids are at a level 3, then we can rewrite the course descriptions at that level with those proficiency ranges, so we can submit the information over to the UC system, aligned to the new standards, aligned to the framework, and then they approve it at that load value. And if it gets approved, then we can start talking about instructional materials. I did want to take this opportunity to clarify a misconception. We have 2 programs. And I use my hands because I'm always a teacher. I'm so sorry. This is the Heritage Program, our original program, was created in the 1990s. We did not have state standards then. All we had was a framework. We didn't get state standards until the 2000s. I think in the 90s, we had national standards. So the original textbooks that were created were not in alignment with the new standards as they were coming in. The Heritage Speakers Program has that textbook series that they're using. The materials that you saw that weren't packets,
Yes, package.
those are from the standard program. They're 2 separate programs. And they were created by teachers using the guidelines provided to them by the Stanford World Languages Project. And the guidelines, the scope and sequence provided by the World Languages Project is in alignment to the standards. And then teachers were able to take that information and create their own packets. There is a certain amount of academic freedom teachers have to use some materials, not to use others. We were able to use some textbook monies to get that paid because there is no textbooks, first of all, right? And even the few that are out there, if they're being used at a community college, community colleges and universities don't have to follow the state standards that are mandated by the Department of Education. Those apply only to kindergarten through 12th grade. So even though there are some things here and there, they're not aligned to the standards. So whenever we don't have materials because there are no textbooks, and it happens like in music, right? There is no textbook for music, but there are music sheets. Those are instructional materials, right? So I think the packets that the teachers created to survive are instructional materials, but they're for two different programs. So currently, this process of reviewing the Heritage Speakers Program, if it impacts the load value, it would require updated instructional materials, updated to the new standards. But we can't start the conversation until we know what level are we talking about. Are we saying that our Vietnamese heritage speakers are at level 2 of proficiency, or are they at level 3? And then we can develop materials according to that.
So roughly would take another 6 months or a year or 2 years? What's your?
Oh, I hope not that long. I'm supposed to get the findings in March, end of March. And then we sit down and review them and find out, okay, what are the easy first steps? Kind of like what I brought the ELD program. These were the findings. What were those easy ones we can address, and which are the ones that are taking longer? Right now, one of the recommendations for ELD was new instructional materials. In fact, and I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, but ELD is very similar to Vietnamese. There is no ELD major.
Mhm.
There is no ELD credential program. Teachers who are ELD teachers tend to be English teachers or world languages teachers. So then right now that we have to pick new instructional materials, because that was the recommendation from West Ed, we had to contract with West Ed to come back and start teaching our ELD teachers, our committee of 8 teachers that are going to do the work, about ELD, about the ELD standards, about what high quality instruction is for ELD. So the Vietnamese teachers are not the only ones. There's other subjects where there is no major specifically. Teachers, out of the love for what they do, learn and, push forward so that they can provide a good education to our students.
I do have some more questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know how many administrator or teacher who have the credential on the Vietnamese language, so they can help out when the program or the process will be developed, help to review? Do we have any administrators or teacher who have that credential?
Not that, so I can almost,
Maybe I can address that sounds like an HR type of question. So we do have administrators who have their proficiency or credentials to teach Vietnamese. And of course we have staff members because we offer the Vietnamese language program. So there are staff members and administrators who have that credential to teach Vietnamese.
We do.
Yes.
Okay, great. Now talking about that when you mentioned about we're gonna work with another special assignment with a teacher to work on this process. I'm really glad to hear that. What I want to make sure that the team need to ensure that the materials that are not affiliated with the language Ho Chi Minh City and the author that was endorsed by the current Vietnamese government should be removed from the district, because last January meeting, a lot of committee members expressed this feeling because the parents or that really want to hear, because it's very sensitivity about the language, about the culture, about the history. And you know that with Eastside, we also have the resolution, for the flag, and also the the history of the culture. And I want to say that really want to know that, I mean, I would recommend probably in the next board meeting, maybe we should agendize it to have this subject to bring back in terms of should we create a committee to include some administrator, in the district, some Vietnamese educators, some the community that really understand the culture and the history to help review the process. We don't want to have any chaos, any problem after you develop the whole process with the instructional material, because we don't want to interfere what have you done. We just want to say, if after the process, could we have the committee to help review and oversee the project in terms of like the budget? Because what I heard from the community that some of the allocation funding was not fair for the Vietnamese textbook or Vietnamese language. So that's something that I really want to review and, present to the board. So I think that is those questions that I have right now. And, we'll have any other question later on.
Okay, yeah. So first I want to just, for clarity purposes, because it's been mentioned a few times, in IPC, we do have Vietnamese staff members. We have an APD. We have actually the ESTA curriculum chair, and we have our director, one of our directors that sits on the Instructional Policies Committee. And to your question or your point of the committee, our Instructional Policies Committee is that committee that oversees and that looks and approves for piloting or for permanent status, that reviews instructional materials. So as per our board policies, we already have existing processes. The purpose of doing the presentation in the format that we did was to provide for the board that overarching process for what we already do, what's already currently in place. The board already has a number of policies that speak to exactly what you're looking for, right? Our statement of educational philosophy, excuse me, specifically speaks to exactly what you want to happen for the Vietnamese language program. And so I think there's already existing structures that allow for what you're asking to happen within that. I mentioned as one of my follow-up items is to be more inclusive of our parents and our students. And so that's one of the things that we're working in IPC. We had a student governing board last year that sat an active member of Instructional Policies Committee. And so we already have existing structures to be able to meet those requests that you have made, Trustee Lee, without having to bring about something different. It's just a matter of, as I mentioned in my areas for growth and next steps, looking at how do we improve the communication aspect of it so that there's full transparency and that the correct information is out there. That's a key piece, the correct information. There has never been an intent or a desire to do away with the current textbook. There's processes for that. We can't just do away with the textbook that's been in use. There are processes for that. And so part of the reasoning also for bringing forth this very long, I know, an extensive presentation was to provide the actual information of how our processes work as a whole, and then bring you the specificities of the current program that is in question, which is our Vietnamese language program. In terms of the funding piece of it, we have a textbook fund, instructional materials fund that Dr. Huntoon can speak to, that actually provides for us the opportunity when there is an adoption coming up, when there is the selection coming up to use those funds. There is no, you get this much, you get this much. We do not allocate the textbook funds per subject area. It is just a big pot of money that we use as these needs come up, as the math book textbook piece comes up because of the changing standards. With this new change into world language framework, it's how then do we catch up to these new standards, these new frameworks, and then what is going to be the funding that is needed to ensure we have the highest of quality instructional materials that are in adherence to the California Department of Education and all the other guidelines that we have to meet for that. And so we do not allocate funding to French, to Spanish. No, we have one pot of money that we use as part of our textbooks, instruction and materials. And then we utilize it as is needed based on whatever new requirements and guidelines come forth as per the California Department of Education.
Thank you.
If I may, I did want to add also a clarification point. When the Heritage Speakers programs came about in our district, it was a time when we did not teach world languages. We taught foreign languages.
Mm.
The world has changed. It wasn't until 2018 when the state made the change from foreign to world. That tells you the shift in thinking. When Spanish for Heritage Speakers and the Vietnamese Heritage Speakers programs were created, they were created with special monies. They were created with grants from language minority programs. They were created with grants, supplementary ed. They were this group of students who were not part of the core, right? Unfortunately, education has worked that way for a long time. And historically, Vietnamese, Spanish for Heritage Speakers came into the part of the World Languages Department, whereas Vietnamese speakers stayed off to the side, outside of it, right? And I think that's what we're kind of seeing right now, the shift. We have made a commitment as a district that we serve all students. That commitment in instructional services has meant that our subject area coordinators, especially our core subject area coordinators, are now working with the teachers and the program for students with moderate to severe disabilities. Our students who are on the spectrum, our students who have some intellectual disabilities, because they need standards aligned instruction and they need to support the instruction there. We're bringing in our English learners into instructional services because they are not over there, the others. And the same thing with Vietnamese, they're part of the World Languages program. So what you're also seeing right now is that shift of people being, having students out there somewhere in pods and bringing them all into the instructional services department served by the subject area coordinators. Lastly, I would be remiss if I did not share my concern. First of all, I have to say that it was very difficult to listen to members of our community relive their pain at a board meeting based on information that they had heard, because that's never been our intent. Those of us who come from another country go through traumatic experiences anyway. I cannot imagine what it's like to leave your country in a situation like some of our Vietnamese community members have left. However, we are bound by Ed Code to teach world languages in a certain way, to teach world languages as a way to reach out to the world. I shared with you some examples of what world language teaching is according to the state of California. We need to teach them about the cultures who speak the language over there, not just here. Whether it's the home country, whether it's France, or whether it's some of the other countries in Africa where French is spoken. I don't know how to reconcile the concerns with the state requirements. I do have a concern that if we make changes to the requirements from the state of California as to use the world languages as a way to reach out to the world, that we may not be meeting the requirements as they are listed in Ed Code and in the standards and in the framework. So that's, I think, a conversation maybe for another time. But my role in this district is to ensure that we follow Ed Code and board policy and standards. And so there must be a way to make those things work, but we want to make sure that our kids continue to receive the credit that they have.
Yeah, I understood your concerns, and I really appreciate when you share that with us. I think it's as a person to look beyond the whole project, and I know that how the student gonna have to learn in the classroom, and you want to open up, for the student to learn the word. And I think that we probably could share some information why that, this is very sensitivity subject for that, on that lesson, because that's what the history, why that the people, love communist country. I think the student, I understood that we're not going to force, but we just want them to understand, the people that living here and express the concern and express the history. And we teach the student to understand that. And we express the word. I mean, so of course they were not confusing, but they can say, oh, why that people offended this? But they're gonna have to understand a bit history. So that's what I want to know. And from my understanding is some of our administrator as teachers who wrote the Tiếng Việt Mến Yêu are still in the district, correct? Some of them are here.
Yes.
So maybe we're gonna have to work, with them and see, or talk with them and have some idea so we can collaboratively with the next program for instructional materials. I mean, I'm just get a suggestion because the teacher for special assignment probably will be well-rounded, will understand the culture and history and very linguistic. But the part of it is maybe some of the teachers probably are still much younger generation, might not been through, the whole war, and they might not understand as much. But I hope that this session will open up so we can understand and work with each other, because that's why the community member show up, in the last board meeting, and they express. And I know I received so many phone calls, many emails, and I want to make sure that we did listen to our community members, but we want to work together collaboratively for our younger generation to understand the sensitivity as well, learn about history, culture, and open the word for them to understand, different languages. That's what I think.
Precisely for that, I want to thank the team for presenting tonight and also thank our community for letting us know their concerns in the past. And you have been heard. And our value, it's not to just create a textbook to sell somewhere else, even though that's a wonderful and great thing for our district and for our community up and down the state. But our goal is to make sure that we develop and adjust our curricular materials for the heritage speaker class in a way that meets the rigor of the University of California system, allows our students to engage where they are, and also make sure that we are aware of the memory and the life of our community, and make sure we do have this job of reconciling. How do we put those two together? And I think we have people in good places ready to do that work. And when I have the next steps on the board and see that we're going to be hiring from essentially someone who's got that teaching experience as well as some understanding of these standards, and then being able to move to, if we ever create additional materials to up that load value, that it meets all our needs, the needs of the community and the needs of making sure that our students can enter the UC system from those classes with the full rigor that we intend. And so I thank the community for being present very much. What I'm proud of on the east side too, and this is, sometimes the work is hard and sometimes it takes discussion to get done. We're the district that's creating these materials. We're the district that noticed the differences in load values. And the people that presented tonight have set us a course going forward to make sure that the students that are in our Vietnamese studies program and our heritage program enter the UC as equal value and equal level of their peers. And we're going to get that work done in a way that's mindful of who we are and where our students are going.
Thank you for that. Lee, or any other comments from the board colleagues here?
I just have the quickest comment. That was amazing. That was like a CAT scan of our district, just like a deep slice all the way through. I'm just in awe. honestly. And I feel so, what a great education in our process, like the detail, the thoroughness. Anyway, I'm almost speechless. That was amazing.
Trustee Herrera, I
Well,
see you get
given
next to
that
the
generous
microphone.
remark, I want to ditto that I was impressed by how deep and integrated it was, both at the big framework level and right down to the application, and how it's tied to our institutional values and our awareness of community needs. It's very conscious, this whole thing. It demonstrates how people like yourselves, who have been in the community, in the trenches and teaching and learning and know the East Side, how you would take state standards and frameworks and every other thing that you have to put in the mix and actually come out with a very skillful application of it. So it's hard to miss that in a presentation like this. So thank you.
Yeah, make sure you have the last word. Sounds like that's where you want to go. It's okay. Ditto to what a lot of my colleagues said. This is definitely very comprehensive. This has been a topic that I've been looking forward to, not just to discuss our Vietnamese materials, instructional materials or textbook, but also to discuss the way that we engage with instruction, right? There's so much to it. And when we think about setting up our students for success and to excel in the world, it's not just like, here's this textbook, we'll teach this and that's it. There is a whole process, higher level process to make sure that we're getting this right. And it's clear that particularly within our Vietnamese program, and I'm probably, I can't differentiate as well, Ms. Guerrero, between both, so I'm just gonna name that. But there is an opportunity to really up the rigor, right? And figure out what does that mean through these frameworks, these standards, these professionals. We wanna make sure that our Vietnamese program is the best of the best. And so, we're hearing our Vietnamese community and saying, this is what we want, the best. And what I'm hearing today with this presentation is we have these processes in place so that we can get to that. So tonight, I want to tell our Vietnamese community, you are heard. We hear you. We are with you. We are committed to this, to making sure that our students get the best of the best and that they get it as soon as possible. So whatever the end product is, with whatever's presented to them in the classroom, our kids are ready and they're ready for college and career. Right. So that is our commitment to you all. And thank you, staff, for setting it up and making sure that that is true.
Also, I just want to take a moment to thank the staff for your incredible hard work to get where we are here today. I also want to thank the member of the publics for coming in January and again today to express their concern. I know that there are issues to be worked on, but clearly the district is ready to embrace. And as my board president have said, we're looking to be ready to create the best of the best in creating our textbooks. I know our district is committed to that. I know the board is committed to that spirit, and we want to be supportive of that. I know there's a number of questions that you and I have had conversation that when I'm referring to Associate Marquez, along with Superintendent Glenn Vendesey, that sometime member of the public may not have the privilege of that. So I just want to quickly ask the questions. We both know the answer, but the public may not know. So I just want to take that moment. There are basically two programs, and I think there's some confusion about that. One is the heritage textbook that my colleagues have textbook and have tiếng Việt Mến Yêu, and there's also a program for what we call non-heritage or standards, if I may, that essentially not have a textbook yet. And some teachers created various different packages in their classroom. Am I correct in summarizing?
Yes, you're correct, sir.
Right. So, and the issues at hand is not about the tiếng Việt Mến Yêu, but rather about the package that was created by independently by teachers under academic freedom. Am I correct, Mr. Vendesey? Am I summarizing it?
Yes, correct.
And that have not been approved by the board and is not a textbook yet.
Correct.
The form of textbook will come to the board at some time when we create a textbooks that the board would then have a chance to approve.
Correct. Yes. And that was one of the items that we listed, that it'll go through the processes, which include IPC, and then it's the recommendation that then is brought forth to the board.
There was some comments, some number of email about whether funding or not, but the reality is the funding comes from a single pool. And I'm gonna ask our CBO to confirm that basically that is a summary that it comes a single pool that is not differentiate. We are intended to create the best of the best, whatever it takes to do so. And we don't separate them by French, German, Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese. Am I correct? All right. So, and I think this is where a number of information that have not been fully to the public. I want to have that conversations because we are intended to create the best of the best, because we have had an incredible books, which I believe my understanding is the first in the nations to have a Vietnamese language textbooks. And we intended to continue that traditions to create the best of the best.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. From my understanding that since 2012 to now, this is the first time that we talk about the developing the process for instructional material. Am I correct?
To this extent, yes, I have brought before updates from IPC as a report, but to this extent, this is the first time, yes.
This is the first time, right? So I think it's a little bit too long to take a look at this. So I hope you can take a bit more time and speed things up so we don't have to wait for another 6 months.
I will work as fast as I can on all the things you asked me to do.
Thank you.
Fair enough too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Again,
Okay.
thanks to the team for
Thank
putting
you.
this all together and so comprehensively and walking us through this. And once again, thank you to the community for your input. You're valued, you heard, and we are going to create excellent materials for our students.
Wonderful. Okay, now we are on to item 8.02, discussion and interaction to adopt resolution to confirm Eastside Union High School District's commitment to fiscal solvency. Associate Superintendent Hantu.
Good evening. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to say this. We are so lucky to have the team that we have on our instruction. They work tirelessly with authenticity and intention. That's all I'm going to say. So the resolution that is before you this evening really is aligned with the multi-year projection that you got as part of the first interim, which was back in December. And so in that third year out, which is the year 2024-25, there is an $8 million reduction in expenditures in that year in order for the district to be able to meet the requirement for their economic uncertainty. It's a requirement. And so this resolution aligns with that.
For a number of years back, we would look at that and say, do we have to take an action this year? And because we know that the state only allocates annually, but we're forced to budget over 3 years. So this body has taken the approach of let's keep working, let's keep looking for ways to improve programmatically, and we'll move the expenditure that budget expense to the third year, and hoping that we can either get additional monies from the state or make changes in the interim to avoid that eventuality.
And work with our stakeholders and association members.
Yeah, and can I add, this is a strategy that the board adopted, what, like 5 or 6 years ago? Whenever you did that point counterpoint. 2016, okay,
6
so
years.
it's been, okay, so it's been a minute, but that's kind of been our board practice.
Yeah,
So
this isn't aligned
this
with
isn't
that.
new, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, out of that point counterpoint thing came an understanding, especially on my part, that we were repeating a process in complying with state and county mandates that continually put us in a position of giving layoff notices that we then, had to rescind when we saw that new information was coming to totally revising the 3-year projection thing. And so I came up with the proposal that we ought to always postpone by a year. And the county compromised with us by saying, we'll accept that if you adopt a resolution committing to a certain level of reductions without needing to specify where. And ever since that, this is really an innovative thing because other districts don't do it, but it allows us to avoid even layoff notices when they're not needed.
Any other discussion on this item, colleagues, before we adopt the resolution or we put a motion on the floor? For this?
Move for approval.
I'll second.
Okay, so we got a motion by Doe, seconded by Cortese. Lee, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Vote passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we are officially on section number 9, so public hearings. All right, 9.01. So we will now hold a public hearing, which is scheduled to be, it was supposed to be at 6:15, but it's 8:11. That's just where we are, regarding the disclosure of major provisions of proposed tentative agreement with San Jose Federation of Teachers, AFT Local 957, AFL-CIO, July 1st, 2021 to July 30, 2024. So calling for speakers. Calling for public speakers a second time. Oh, we have a speaker. All right, Mr. Michael Delaney.
Thank you for your patience and welcome. This is good things right now.
You have 5 minutes, sir.
He's used to it. He's an adult ed teacher.
If you can state your name for the record, please, first.
Michael Delaney, co-president, AFT 957, San Jose Federation of Teachers. I'll keep my remarks brief. I really came just to speak on behalf of the adult ed faculty to thank really Associate Superintendent Nguyen and the whole district negotiating team. I thought it was a productive negotiating process. I was here in late August to sunshine our proposals. We dragged our feet a bit, thought about things for a while, but then we went through, I think, 4, almost 5 rounds of negotiation. The associate superintendent, of course, Becky Laguna, and then Tracy Williams, Sean Tran, and Jorge Silva from the adult ed administration. Naturally, there were points that we didn't necessarily agree on, but I think there were we made some good progress, and we brought in some things that will help to attract talent and to retain talent. And so thanks for considering, and I hope you vote to approve. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you.
And thank you to you and your team as well.
Thanks for your patience in waiting for this moment.
Do we have any other speakers? Nothing online? No, okay, great. And this is, this is a motion. All right, so do I have a? Oh, okay. So the hearing is officially closed. We don't have any more. Public testimony on this matter is now closed. Now, this is where we go to section 9.02. And now we take action to ratify and approve this tentative agreement with AFT Local 957. So with that, do I have a motion on the floor?
I apologize for what item again?
We're 902.
902.
Okay, so move for approval.
Okay, so we got a motion from trustee Herrera. Second by trustee Lay. I don't think this Lee votes on these, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Great, okay. Next time, Lee. Board, all of those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? My
board was stepped
colleague
out.
is stepped out, but it passed
Unanimously.
unanimously. Yes, the motion passes. Okay, so that's 9.02.
I know Mr. Denley kind of stole my thunder a little bit by thanking our negotiations team, but I do want to thank AFT's negotiations team as well. I know during the process, it's officially called negotiations, but it felt more like just a collaborative, thought partner process, a problem solving process. And so it was very positive and it was very great. And thank you to Mr. Delaney and his team.
And if I may, I'd like to thank both teams because, when we discussed things, it very much sounded like groups of people trying to make out what's best for staff and students and what's the best way, what changes we can make towards that, which is, I thank you for that approach and your spirit.
Thank you. Thank you, both teams. Wonderful. Okay, now we are moving on to section 10. So this is where members of the public may address the board on any subject not on tonight's agenda. However, provisions of the Brown Act preclude any action. As an unagendized item, no response is required from the board or district staff, and no action can be taken. However, the board may instruct the superintendent to agendize the item for future meeting. Any person may address the board on any item on the meeting agenda. Persons wishing to address the board must fill out the speaker request via online submission. Your comment will be read out loud as part of the public meeting. Comments should be limited to no more than 1,000 characters in length. You may also raise your virtual hand in Zoom to request to speak. You will have 2 minutes to speak. Do we have any public comment?
We have no online, nor do we have in-person public comment.
Anything on Zoom? Any hands raised, Superintendent? No? None. Okay, so we are now moving on to section 11.01. This is presentation information regarding update on novel coronavirus. So we have a resolution. Superintendent Vanderzee.
Yes, before us tonight is a resolution regarding our virtual meetings through through February 28. There have been changes in the rules regarding meeting, and also on February 28th, there'll be the end of the declaration of a state of emergency, which will have different obligations in terms of our being present as board members and the rules of what to do in the case of an absence. There are no, however, in this new language, no obligations or restrictions as to how public comment or public attendance has to be changed. Therefore, it's the recommendation of the administration that even after February 28th, that we continue the online availability for people to participate virtually and to provide their comment this way, which could allow for greater participation, as well as their in-person preference, presence if preferred.
Thank you. Okay, so this is an action, I believe.
We're approving the resolution.
Okay, so I got a motion.
I'll second.
Trustee Doe, second by trustee Cortese. Lee, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Vote passes unanimously. Great. Thank you, Superintendent. Now we are in section 11.02. This is action regarding selection appointment of the Board Audit Committee. Trustee Doe?
Yes, it is recommended the Board of Trustees appoint 3 applicants to serve on the Board Audit Committee, Rajesh Godbow and Brenda Serrano as members serving 2 years term, February 1st, 2023 through January 31st, 2025. And John Ranke as the alternate member serving a 1-year term, February 1st, 2023 through January 31st, 2024. I understand that Mr. Ranke is on Zoom. I'd like to give him the opportunity, should he like to make a quick comment, but that's up to him. No pressure.
Mr. Ranke?
Hi, thank you. I just want to say I'm pleased to continue to serve the district in this capacity. And I look forward to meeting.
Thank you for your continued service.
Thank you for your continued service and all the other members, Mr. Rajesh Godbow and Brenda Serrano, to continue your service to the district. We are very grateful.
Thank you.
Any other discussion, board colleagues? No. That means you too, Lee. Okay, do I have a motion?
Move approval.
Okay. So, motioned by Lay, second
Second.
by Herrera. Lee, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Vote passes unanimously. Congratulations to our committee members and thank you again for your service. Okay, now we are on section, oh,
Madam President, may I suggest as we get to the next item, which will be another lengthy presentation, that perhaps we consider taking a short break so people can kind of
Stretch.
stretch, recharge, because we're about to get into some really good stuff and some really important business of the district.
all right. let's-
And our speakers are, they just perform for an hour.
Okay, 5-minute break. So we'll be back at 8:26. It's 8:21, 8:26. Great.
Yes, 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 let's do it.
All right, we are officially on section 12.02. Assistant Superintendent Marquez, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Once again, good evening, Madam President, trustees, superintendent, superintendent's council and community, Teresa Marquez, Associate Superintendent of Educational Services. And so for this presentation, super excited to bring to you progress on our local control accountability plan in regards to our goals. I'd like to take you through an overview of the presentation because I'm actually going to do this one differently than the way I've been doing it in the past. Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of ask for some grace in allowing me to go through the process and give you my rationale as to why. I'm gonna ask Mary to give you a printout of some key slides, and I selected some key slides so that you could have that reference of that overarching and the shift of how I'm going to present, so that even though I went through the slide, and as I'm referring back to it, you have some key slides in front of you that you can kind of see where my thinking, hopefully, is going in terms of like the overall picture of it. Okay, so just for you to kind of have as a reference there on the side. So our goal for the presentation is to provide you an update as to the progress on our LCAP, this year's LCAP, our 2022-2023 LCAP. And my intent is to be able to go through it in the following format. Make some connections, specifically to how our LCAP connects to our overarching vision and approach to responding as a system, which you're very familiar with that aspect of it. That's not the shift. The shift really comes in the following pieces. That I'm going to ask us to shift our view of the LCAP from one of individualized goals and actions to a more integrated approach, which is going to impact how I'm going to ask you to look at our metrics and to respond to the question, how do we monitor progress and overall levels of student achievement? I've included a reflection, and again, it's my reflection, but I'm gonna pose the question so that at a different time, as you're examining this, you yourself can also do that reflection. And then I'm gonna introduce this concept that is still a work in progress, but that I think is key to us really shifting our outcome. And that is looking at how do we measure the capacity and fidelity of what we say we're going to do. Okay, and then some next steps. Okay, so just kind of have that sheet in front of you so you could kind of see where I'm taking you through as part of the presentation. So again, the board is very familiar with this in terms of why we're here. We're to ensure that we keep our promise of college and career readiness for all our students. And that for us is the key aspects and characteristics listed within our graduate profile. We know that we're going to do this through building equitable communities. You're also very familiar. I hope our community is also becoming more familiar with what we mean when we say equitable communities. And we know that we're going to do this through a systems lens, through a systems response, where we're going to look at policies, we're going to look at removing the barriers, access, and then those practices. And at the center, you see it says all students achieving at high levels. Okay, for us, part of the shift is when we say all students, we're not looking at just one component of the student. Next slide, please, Mr. Vandersee. We're looking at the whole child, the academic, the behavior, and the social emotional. So right at the center of our systems response is that whole child. And of course, I'm going to ask you to look at it through the lens of equity. This board before me, boards before you, some of you probably, Herrera, you know this the best because you are most tenured. Trustee, you've always put in place policies that really speak to who we should be as a district. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is that definition of equity, that you're really looking at it through that lens of providing what it is that each student needs, that it doesn't have to just be this cookie cutter approach, that it has to be approaches that are going to meet that whole child. Right? And so you've put this in place as a board to ensure that however the kid comes to us, it is our responsibility as a system to respond to those needs. So let's get into the LCAP. And as a reminder, the LCAP is a California Department of Education plan that each district is expected to complete. It goes in 3-year cycles. And the plan is to include our goals, our actions in connection with alignment. So I just want to point out again, just around that, you do not have the full printed presentation. What you have in front of you is just what I felt were some key slides for you to kind of keep the overarching reference that I'm hoping to make as part of this new shift of how I'm doing the presentation. And so again, just a reminder that the LCAP is a 3-year plan that gets revised and gets looked at on an annual basis. And for us, we want to make the LCAP more than just this compliance piece that we're required to do as part of the state. And so for us, the LCAP, next slide, please, Mr. Vandersee, is grounded in our work of multi-tier systems of support. And so you'll see, if you've had an opportunity to review the LCAP, that in multiple areas and pieces of the LCAP, and even in our goals, we actually call out multi-tier systems of support as the framework. And so just to remind you the goals, we have 6 goals for this year. We have a goal around college and career readiness, graduation rate, achievement of our English language learners, our responses to behavior and our efforts to sustain a healthy and safe school environment, attendance and chronic absenteeism. And then just as a reminder, one of the new regulations or initiatives of the California Department of Education is to target districts, and I'll use the word mandate, that they add a goal for specific student populations that are not meeting our targets. Last year, we were targeted for our homeless youth. This year, we will have to specifically add foster youth to the goal to specify those 2 student populations. So again, our response to really addressing that whole child is through our systems response and specifically our multi-tier systems of support. And just as a reminder, next slide, please, Mr. Van Der Zee. Our multi-tier systems of support is a framework. It's not a program. It's not an initiative. It's an actual framework that is now listed in numerous ed codes to ensure that high quality instruction for each and every one of our students that addresses the 3 components of academics, behaviors, and social emotional. And it really is for us supporting our work to align the work, to align it so that rather than being fragmented, we're more aligned in the programs and offerings that we have for our students. So here's a shift in how I'm going to approach our LCAP. Before I've come to you and I go 1, here's the data, here's some successes, here's some challenges. And then I move, here's the next goal, right? A through G graduation, more about academics, goal 4 around behaviors, right? But to me, it seemed like I'm separating it into these separate pieces where really there's this integration where behavior is integrated into the academics. And just to kind of give you an idea here, so if we have students who miss instruction for whatever reason, whether it's chronic absenteeism or as a result of a behavior consequences, they're suspended, they miss instruction. That then results in some potential academic gaps, which then means the student falls behind because of those gaps. And then it may manifest itself in some form of behavior. And you could really start any one of those pieces. I can start at, I'm falling behind academically. I'm going to manifest that in behavior. I then get suspended and miss instruction, and then I create academic gaps. And so because of this, because it's hard to separate the behavior from the academic, from the social emotional, we got to look at the LCAP, even though, yes, we have 6 separate goals, as an integrated approach. And so again, we have these separate goals. Next slide, Mr. Van Der Zee. Individual, where I'm going to ask us to now look at them as a collective unit of how we approach the work for that whole child. So, data. In the past, I've inundated you, I have flooded you with outcome data, and that's it. We look at it and we say, oh, we got work to do. Or, hey, yeah, we made some growth here, and then we just kind of leave it. I haven't brought to you other data pieces that speak to, okay, well, we said this was an action that we're hoping contributes to this outcome. How was the implementation of it? Did we actually have the capacity to implement it to fidelity? And so I'm going to take you through that aspect of it. It's still a work in process because we really haven't looked at our LCAP through that lens. But I want to just introduce this to you because my hope is that as we move forward, we'll be able to have not only the outcome data, but the capacity data as well as the implementation data, which the capacity, and I'll point to you here. The outcome is essentially, right, the behaviors, what the data pieces that we're used to seeing, academic behaviors. So it could be grades, it could be graduation rates, suspension rates, all of those data you're used to seeing. Then we have a capacity data, which looks at our system. What is the capacity of the system? Do we have the right resources? Do we have the right staff? Do we have the appropriate funding allocated to this? And then we look at implementation, right? Well, if we said we were going to do this, did we do it to fidelity? Or do we just say we did it and, oh, maybe here it's done pretty good, over here, not so much, right? So actually looking at it through that lens. Now, because the capacity data and implementation data is a work in progress, for this presentation, I am going to focus, you're still going to see a lot of the outcome data, but even that, I'm going to show it to you differently. Okay? I'm so excited. I'm sorry, I can't contain myself. So within the outcome data, we've been used to seeing this like annual large scale data. I give you 4-year graduation rates. I give you 4-year A through G rates. I give you end of year suspension rates, right? I give you end of year after 4 years. And we look and we're like, oh my God, I hope the kiddos are finding success after us. We see not a lot of opportunity for impact, right? For feedback on that. And so, you know, we're used to that data. I'm going to shift us to have us look also at what we're going to call periodic data, which is designed to be more immediate, right? So examples of that would be those wonderful on-track graduation rates that Kristen shares, like at the end of the year. We could actually even look at them at the end of each semester, right? If we really wanted to get in there. And that whole child data report, which we know as the early warning system, every 6 weeks, right? So periodic data. So no more just 4 year. Yes, you're going to bring it because it's important, but more periodic, closer to the student. And then I want us to look at how we can start shifting to more ongoing on-time data, which is right there at the student level, which we're looking at classroom assessments. What's happening in that classroom, period 2, math 1 on Monday? Did you get it? Did you not? How can I intervene? Looking at behavior referrals. Today you got a behavior referral. Let's address it now. Let's look at shifting that behavior. Daily attendance, weekly grades. So trying to hone it in closer to the student where we can have the greatest impact, greater rate of feedback. Next slide. Right, so larger data, infrequent feedback, right? We can look at it. We can maybe say, okay, you know, we need to make sure we improve our graduation rates. But in terms of providing that immediate feedback for action, it gets more frequent as we move closer to that student. So again, let me start with the annual large scale data, right? We're used to that. Just still want to share some of it with you. Okay, so you've seen this before. We have our A through G completion rates. And this is for 2020, 2021, and 2022. So you see the comparison there. And we have it split by special populations and then by race and ethnicity. And so nothing much has changed from data that you've seen in the past, right? Our English learners, our foster youth, many of our special populations are still completing A through Gs at lower rates than the district as a whole. Similar to when you look at it through the ethnic racial breakdown. Our Hispanic and African American students also are completing A through G at lower rates than their Asian and white peers. Okay, we're familiar with this data. Similar outcomes with our graduation data, right? Again, 2020 to 2021, 21, 22, just 2 years of data that you're looking at here. Caveat, right? Remember that in the 2020-21, we had that legislation that lowered graduation requirements to the state minimum requirements. And so, you know, just a little caveat there. But again, we continue to see similar results that we've seen in the past, where some of our special populations, such as English learner students with disabilities, foster youth, continue to perform at lower rates in terms of graduation than our other students. And again, similar data points when broken down by ethnicity and race. And then again, large scale annual data, we look at our suspension rates. End of this last school year, 2021-22, you could see again the various suspension rates where some certain student groups based on race and ethnicity, broken down by race and ethnicity, I should say, have a higher suspension rate than other students. And then the last big measure is our chronic absenteeism, right? Very similar from the other ones, other data points in terms of student achievement, where you're looking at certain student populations have higher chronic absenteeism rates than others, right? So end of year data, end of 4-year data. And so when we look at just the reflective piece of it on this data, right, large scale data, what are some possible system elements that may be contributed to these outcomes, right? And we have contributing elements for improvement, and then we have those that contribute to the status quo, right? And so we could look at the implementation of our multi-tiered systems of support is a contribution for improvement. As we define what that high quality instruction is for all our students, that's going to improve our annual outcomes. The intentional use of our LCAP funding to target student populations. And then our board policy updates, right? As we bring forth updates to the board that are not only in alignment with the mandates and regulations of Ed Code, but also looking at ways for us to be able to ensure our students are succeeding. In terms of contribution for the status quo, right? I'd bring you to the lack of capacity and implementation data, right? Our ability to be able to assess and look at, are we putting the resources where they need to be? And is there fidelity to implementation? And then again, that fragmented approach, right, to the whole child, looking at it as individual goals as opposed to this holistic plan of addressing the aspects of the whole child. And then sometimes, right, we get in the way of ourselves, our dispositions and beliefs of what we can and cannot do. And what in certain times, what some priorities should be over others. And so we sometimes just as human beings get in the way of ourselves in the various beliefs that we hold. So what I'm hoping to be able to look at, which again, this is a work in progress, is this whole idea around capacity data, right? So I just shared with you the outcome data for large annual measures. My reflection of what I think contributes for improvement and for status quo, but I want to start looking at it through the lens of capacity. So we have these 6 goals. So what's our level of capacity when it comes to our human capital? Do we have the people in the positions that we need to have them that have the skills, the commitment, the disposition, right? The capacity to be able to do that specific work. Do we have the social capital? What's our relationships with each other, right? Our relationship with our bargaining units, right? Is that allowing us to be able to move and build that capacity within our system? Is there program coherence, right? To what degree do we have this integrated common approach framework to the work that we're doing, to the program? And then are the resources there, the funding there, right? Are we organized in a manner that is allowing us to do that work? And so this is something that I'd like to start looking at as we do a more comprehensive review of the actual actions and goals that are held within our LCAP. And for that matter, even everything else, right? All those programmatic offerings that we have. Do we have the capacity? What's the data telling us when it comes to these elements? And then looking for opportunities for growth. And then the third piece of data, right? We have the outcome data, capacity data, implementation data. Go back to one slide, Mr. Vanderzee. This one, we looked at it through the fidelity of implementation. So I give you there 3 examples. These are 3 actions that are listed in our LCAP. Cyber High online credit recovery, summer school program, which can fall under credit recovery, coordination of MTSS by our teacher on special assignment, right? We put in the LCAP funding to provide this new position. And then coordination of our mental health and wellness structures, right? We have a social worker lead here at the district that supports the work of the social workers in the wellness centers across our school site. So to what level of fidelity are each of those being implemented? So I'll give you an example here. Next slide, please, Mr. Manager. Cyber High. Our Cyber High is an online credit recovery for students that need to recoup a failed course, right? Kids go online. So the program features are this. Here's how we set it up. We said, okay, students get enrolled in these online courses based on the evaluation of their credits by a counselor. A counselor meets with the kiddo. They say, hey, you're this far away from graduation. You have your 6 or 7 classes. You still need some credit recovery. Let's sign you up for Cyber High. We provide instruction and support and monitoring by a teacher to support them, right? Yes, it's online, but they're still going to need that support to make sure they're on task, they're on pace, and if they have questions, there's a teacher there to support them. And for us, because it's intended to be this fluid in and out, it should be offered before or after school or during a 1st or 7th period to allow for that flexibility of a student. So the first question adherence. Are we following the features that we've described? It's a yes or no. And in this case, no, right? In an evaluation of the way Cyber High is being offered across our school sites, it's not being done to fidelity of these program features. So are we adhering to it? No. Then we get to measure the quality. What's the caliber of these delivered features? What's the quality of the counselor conversation? What's the quality of the instructional program? What's the quality of the administrator building those sections where they need to be built? I didn't measure that because I don't have the rubric yet, right? So this is a work in progress. We just want to show you an example of the possibilities of where we can go with this. And then being able to then look at what are those areas for improvement? How do we get to fidelity? Okay, so just wanted to give you that example. So next part is the fun part, right? Periodic data. So now we're going to get closer to the student, right? So you're used to the next data point, which is our on track. In this case, A through G is what I provide you for a reference. And you could see at the end of each school year, have our ninth graders met the required A through G coursework, meaning they earned a C or better in those A through G courses. What's the success rate for, or completion rate for our 10th graders and 11th graders? So you could see, right? It decreases, unfortunately, after each grade level. Little success there. We had a little uptick for our ninth graders in terms of them completing it from previous year to 21-22. But you could see here again, I don't have to wait till that ninth grader is a senior. I can act at the end of that ninth grade year and put in interventions and support for that student, okay? Same thing for graduation. We have the same on track measures for graduation. I'm not gonna have you strain your eyes. This is data that you've seen before that you're very familiar with, and you could see there that little uptick for our ninth graders in terms of on track. And then you see, unfortunately, a slight decrease for our 10th and 11th graders in terms of being on track for graduation. Now, this next data point is something that I know Superintendent Vanderzee has mentioned, but I don't think we've ever actually officially brought as a data point to the board. And so it's our early warning system, which we're still dabbling with the name because it's 6 weeks out. How early is that, right? It's a warning system. I'm calling it the whole child data report because it includes key aspects of attendance, behavior, and academics. And so this is just giving you a glance as to how this report is surfaced. Each row is a student that has information specific to the student. So it's that individualized student that has a risk factor that is taken from attendance, behavior, and grades. And so the beauty of this is that we have a system in Illuminate where this report has been created by the very fabulous Kirsten King, our Director of Assessment and Accountability. It's downloadable, which means we can filter and really hone in and get even closer to finding groups of students to establish responses for their needs. And we could actually look at it, of course, at the individual student level as well and hone in on responses for that individual student. And so this really starts to get closer to that student level. So let me share just some very key data on this that was surfaced from this report. Okay. So this report for the end of the first semester, okay? And just to, again, as a reminder, this report can be pulled at the end of every grading period. So at the end of the very first 6 weeks of school, then we have another one for the next 6 weeks, and then we have one for the last 6 weeks or the end of the semester. So this particular report is pulled from that last marking period, okay? So in this last marking period, a little bit over 14,000 students were surfaced as potentially at risk for not graduating. Meaning that either based on their attendance, their behavior, their academics, or a combination of those, they exhibited a risk factor that put them in a potential risk. Okay, so 14,000. I want you to look at though, because the ones I'm gonna just kind of pull out and dig in a little bit deeper on are the blue, the students in the blue, which is the 7,613 that were at the highest risk. Okay, the red, Mr. Vanderzee's pointing it there. And so we're gonna hone in on those. So we're gonna hone in on that 7,613. here's how those 7,613 students break down. Pretty equally distributed by grades, which actually, I'll be honest with you, surprised me. I was thinking it was gonna be more 9th and 10th graders, but if you see, it's a pretty equal distribution in terms of who's by grade level at the highest risk level, okay? Then we look at it through program and race designation. So let me just orient you to this one. So our McKinney-Vento students, we have a total of 915 McKinney-Vento students across our district. 55% of those students are at that at-risk level. Right? They represent that 7,613, part of that 7,613. Just another example, our English learners, we have just about under 4,000. So 59% of our English learners were surfaced by this report. Right, so about, right, over half of our English learners were surfaced as being at that risk level. Then you look at it through grades, right? And you could see the breakdown. 81% of the students that were identified at that highest at-risk level had 1 or more Fs. Right, so again, that's 7,613 kids that were surfaced, 81% of them had 1 or more Fs. And so you could see how it breaks down. You could see those that had no Ds or F, right? 627 of them in the green had no Ds and Fs. So why are they at this at-risk level? Attendance, behavior, right? Again, looking at it holistically. And then we look at it through our attendance. 60% of the at-risk of the 7,613 students have 3 or more absences, right? So remember that integrated approach that I showed you, right? What's missing instruction, academic gaps, they fall behind academically, then behavior manifests itself. And then finally, the last way to look at it is through behavior. 93% of the students in that at risk, the 7,613, actually have no behavior incidents. Right, so that when you're looking at it, you're like, well, what does that tell us, right? What are we looking at here then? Let me look in and hone in on those kids and see what's their risk factor. How many Fs do they have? How many Ds do they have? What's their attendance look like, right? And obviously, right, if they're not attending, they may not be exhibiting behaviors because they're not attending, right? And so you kind of look at what's the connection and what's the correlation. But again, very different level of data that allows us to hone in closer to the student, that allows us to prepare responses sooner than having to wait till that 4-year graduation, that 4-year A through G, that end of year suspension rate. So just a few reflections, right? Some of the elements that I think are contributing to us being able to move in the right direction is, first of all, just the fact that we have the capacity to look at this data report. We have more of our students with disabilities in least restrictive environments. They're getting more access to the general ed. And I gotta call out the staff and student resiliency, right? I know that COVID is over, right? Or we seem that we're coming back to normal, but we're still feeling the impact of that, right? So there's this staff and student resiliency that I think is contributing to us being able to move forward. And then of course, areas for us to look at is how are we using the report, right? This is, I think maybe the first time, Mr. Banerjee, we bring it to this level, the early warning system for us to really hone in. So how can we bring it more frequently and how do we utilize it at our school sites so that then it could be actionable? We have to do better at identifying evidence-based academic and behavior interventions in the now, right? So this is every 6 weeks. So at that first marking period, August to about September, right, or October to October, the 6 weeks. Let's grab it there, right? Before they jump onto marking period 3, let's grab it there, right? And then any new ones that maybe surface, let's grab them and let's start looking at it more often to be able to provide that feedback more frequently. I'll skip the capacity. You have an idea. I think I've taken you through the idea of what I'm looking for capacity. Implementation, I think I've given you the ideas to where I'm hoping to go with these 2 elements of capacity. And more in particular, now that we're going to look at it, not just through the annual large scale data, but actually hone in more on the periodic data, which is the early warning system. And then truly then jumping to that on time, ongoing data piece. I think we can skip the 240, yeah. Which is proof right there to the student, right? We can act today during period 2, right? We can act in that moment with that data. And so some of the examples that we have of this type of data that we can use is our shape data, right? For behavior. Again, looking at all the different elements. And so all our sites have access to this snapshot of data that they can even hone in and look at it by location, by student, by action, by response on a daily basis. And then when you look at our tiered pyramid here that shows who do we need to hone in on, right? How does it shift? So we can look that the majority of our students across our district don't have a referral, or maybe have 1 referral. They got the referral, had their the behavior response, they were done. We have 348 students currently across the district with 2 to 5 referrals, behavior referrals. And then we have 46 students with 6 or more referrals. So that data point is daily. We can look at it on a daily basis to identify what do we do with those 46? What is needed for? Let's identify them. Let's see what kind of referrals they're getting. Let's see what are the responses we've been working with to actually then shift that behavior. In terms of attendance, our attendance accounting team does a wonderful job of providing weekly attendance reports that allow for schools to be able to respond more immediately as opposed to waiting till you have attendance rates that are surfacing various students who are meeting the threshold for chronic absenteeism, right? So really being able to capture like, whoa, last week I was at 90, now I shifted all the way to 85, what's happening in my community? And being able to actually put those responses in place. And then for attendance, you could actually hone in and surface at any given time the number of kids that have had full day absences and be able to see at any given time, daily basis, on a weekly basis, to be able to then surface those students before they become chronic absentees, before they become part of our truancy programs. And then finally, in the classroom, right, where the instruction happens, how can we use the teacher assessments that they use on a daily basis to really look at the feedback that they can provide to the student so they could catch them before they don't understand the concept, right? Catch them, there's gaps, let me fill them, and let me support you. And actually go through that cycle of assessment that looks at what do I want them to learn? How am I gonna get that learning across? And what am I gonna do for the kids that maybe don't get it? How am I gonna fill those gaps? How am I gonna accelerate the students that are ready to accelerate? What's the feedback I'm gonna give them? And then how am I gonna redesign my planning for the very next day or maybe even the very next period based on that immediate data piece? And then of course, grades. We have this new system that is Canvas that allows us to, as parents, engage and see the level of completion of assignments, but the teachers also can see who's completing assignments. To what level of mastery or proficiency are they completing those assignments? And they have it there accessible to them through Canvas, where they can actually then group students in different manners, look at their mastery of assignments for each kid. And so there's tons of potential capacities within our new system to allow for teachers to really hone in and look at the grades, their own grade distribution for each of their periods on a daily basis. So when it comes to this, close to the student, ongoing, on-time data, we know that we're gonna get the outcomes if we intentionally use that behavior data, right? It's also like, how are we using the data? What's that intentional use of it? I have to call out the priority standards work that's been done by our teachers, led by the subject area coordinators, because now you're actually being able to get closer to responding to that question of what is the grades aspect of it, right? What's the mastery level on these priority standards that as teachers we have decided are the content and the what we're going to teach. Now we can start then shifting into what are the skills that the kids are learning, and then how are we going to measure their attainment of that. And then again, I have to keep calling out the staff and student resiliency, just because of the current world that we're living in. In terms of looking at areas for us to grow, is looking at our systemic approach to the use of formative assessments, right? How can we as a district support our teachers in being able to implement those formative assessments so that they can use that data to redesign their lesson for the next period, for the next day, for the next week as needed. And we have to start looking at our approach in a more integrated manner so that we're actually able to look at the academic, behavior, and social emotion instruction and intervention in day-to-day students' experiences, right? And I know that's hard, right? Like teachers, it's like, I'm a math teacher. That's my groove. That's my content. How do I then integrate that with the needs that my kids are coming to when it comes to behavioral needs and then social emotional needs, right? And so being able to support that work. Again, we'd look at this data as well and these efforts through the capacity lens, which I've spoken to already, through the implementation lens of really looking at, are we adhering to what we say we're gonna do? What's the quality of what we're saying we're doing? What's the exposure? Like how many of our kids are actually participating on this? And are the right kids that we targeted participating on this? And then are they engaged? What's that level of responsiveness for our students in terms of what we say we offer, right? And so surveys, like getting that student voice piece. Hey, we think Nuzella and no reading is something that we want to embed as part of our work to supporting you. And then actually measuring the responsiveness to that by our students. What's their level of engagement in that particular action? So in summary, just want to offer to the board this different approach and lens to how we're going to look at the LCAP, how I'm intending to shift it from individualized goals and actions to a more integrated approach, which really allows us to look at the impacts of each of those components, the missed instruction, the academic gaps, the behavior, and how they're all connected. And so again, my goal moving forward is to look at 3 very different data sources, and then within the outcome data, look at it through not just the annual large-scale data, but that periodic data, and then that in the classroom or ongoing on-time data, so that we can truly respond as a system and meet all our goals together, not in isolation. So next steps for me include the use of capacity implementation data. So develop rubrics, scales for each student element within each of those data sources. Use the 3 levels of outcome as data, as I have shared. Really focus on the periodic and the ongoing, right? Because that's where we can really do the greatest, have the greatest impact. Look at it through the early warning system, formative assessments in the classroom, and then really look to how are we going to support this integrated approach at the school site level? Because this is really going to require us to look at it through the tiered supports that we need to provide to our students based on this data that we're not going to have, right? This periodic data through the early warning system, this ongoing in the classroom data, like it's a lot of work, right? So how are we going to ensure that we do it to fidelity as measured through the implementation? And are we providing the resources and the capacity to do it and do it right? So I do want to share with the board before I open it up to questions that we're starting our new cycle for the 23-24 LCAP. And so, of course, this is something that is a part of California Department of Education. They have the recommended timeline for us to work on this. Just want to point out that the 23-24 LCAP will mark year 3 of the 3-year cycle. Okay, so this next one that I'll be bringing to the board in June will mark year 3 of this 3-year cycle. And the way CDE works, they tend to then like shift things every 3 years as it pertains to the LCAP. Also want to let the board know that one of the main things is obviously getting input from our community. And so I have already calendared and sent out invitations to our various groups and community about our community sessions. You can see I'm holding a number of them, and in recognition of the needs of our community, I hold English ones that have interpretation in Spanish and Vietnamese, and then I hold Vietnamese only sessions because sometimes our community feels more comfortable sharing if they're within their same language peer groups. And then I hold Spanish only community forums. And so I have staff that helps me. I speak Spanish, but I don't speak Vietnamese. And so I have staff that helps me put those together. And then you can see we have staff sessions that are open to both classified and certificated staff. And then we have student sessions that will be later in the month. Yes.
Are these in person or Zoom?
They are still Zoom. I left them Zoom to allow for greater participation. I found that Zoom allows people to just kind of log on instead of having to drive. However, in addition to this, I didn't list this, but what I have also done is I've gone out to the site during principals' coffees. I've gone out during their collaboration time. And then I've also asked, what I do is as part of the timeline is I send out like a lesson plan for teachers to do what if they so choose to use up their instructional time, where they can do it, let's say in their English class, they go through what the LCAP is, and then they collect student input. And then we also send the survey out to our community as well as our students and our staff.
Questions about the
yes.
community events, if I may.
Mhm.
What kind of numbers are we getting in terms of participation by the member of the community?
It depends. The English ones tend to be the highest attended for those. We've had small participation in both our Spanish only and Vietnamese only ones. I don't have exact numbers, but I can get those. Maybe for the language only ones, about 15 to 20, maybe. And then on the English ones, maybe 20 to 30. It's never been in the hundreds, I don't think, since we've done it through Zoom. But before we used to do, Mr. Vanderzee would go out to each of the individual sites, and then each site would get theirs. At some point, I'd like to return to that aspect of it. But I'm gonna finish this 3-year cycle, and then I'll design that piece of it.
Just another, what are we doing to let people know about these?
So I've sent out through our messenger, through text, email. It's on our website as well. And then we'll set up the automated caller.
Are we sending how many texts to all the students or
To the parents.
to the parent? Yeah, that's what I meant. Basically to the 20,000 parents of the 20,000 students we have.
As whoever has a viable cell phone within our Infinite Campus system.
Wow, thank you.
Teresa, I know that I attend several community sessions before with you. And I know that I think it's a parent community specialist did reach out to those folks, in the community, to the parents, and so they can join and understand a bit more. And I know that they might not have familiar with the process as well as the presentation. And usually we always have the someone that translation, and it's really very helpful. Those sessions here that when you mentioned here in the next step of LCAP, this is only for our parents, parents and, in our district that we did not really, actually, we did not invite the community outside the district, correct?
Yeah, our target population is when we send out the messages for the community sessions is our parents and their families, but anybody can join those. Yeah. We've had actually like our educational partners, like Californians for Justice has come out, San Jose State University representatives have come out. So we've had other educational partners, come out, but our target population for us is our parents. We want to make sure that they have a voice. Mhm. So I do just want to end and just share my appreciation for my whole team. This was not just me. I have thought partners that include Ms. Guerrero, Kristen Keene, who produces all of the data, Tim Nguyen, Miriam Adelot, Dr. Sharon Cavallero, and then all my coordinators. And my classified staff. They do a great job in supporting the work, because the work is really this, right? The LCAP. And so just want to share my appreciation for my classified office staff, our certificated staff, our subject area coordinators, our TOSAs, our leadership team. And then just special shout out, Kristen, I think you're on. She's just a superstar, and I think you all know that. Her ability to just pull data and for us to discuss it, and for her to kind of give me her perspective and really guide me in this direction has been invaluable. So special kudos and thanks to my Director of Assessment and Accountability, Kirsten King. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I think you've just witnessed the power of the Ed Services Division this evening. My goodness, and just so you know, this is them. This is them taking a state process that some districts are still trying to figure out and taking it to the next level and moving a data point, moving us past these end game data points that once we know you just graduate or not, there's no other question to ask. So moving the data point to earlier on, and then the keyword, making it actionable, is if we're going to make a difference in our end game data, that's the move we have to make. And this team has made that possible, doable, and practical.
The two presentations tonight on instructional materials and now the LCAT, you have a PhD dissertation material and everything that's happened. Being very serious. There's some innovation going on here, and it's direct from the field. If you already have a PhD, you ought to go for another one. Now you've got all the material.
I think that team is ready to design the LCAT process for the state.
I do want to make a side observation
Please.
with the greatest appreciation for everything I've heard. And that is, I remember back in the day when the state was driven with a testing mentality and the API scores and all of that, that part of what began to settle into the educator community was we're being over tested. We're being driven by preparing for tests. We're essentially compromising some instructional time in significant degrees and so on and so on. So the part of me that's kind of a system oriented, sense field kind of person, I am curious about the impact of the data collection. It's extremely valuable. I'm excited about the outcome data that is being set up, the implementation data, the student attendance behavior grade, way of kind of tracking. We need to be data driven in order for our intervention to actually have a systemic impact kind of a thing. But I also get to start to, what we need to also, even anecdotally, feel for the impact of data collection, because there can start to be a trade-off, if the outcome is optimal learning environments and staff in optimal conditions and on and on. That's just a side comment, but kudos on everything.
Can I keep going? Because she says you can't. I'm so thrilled for this team and this project. What's brilliant about this is what they've putting this actionable data. It's gathering by doing. It's things we're already doing that they've managed to route and adjust and sort and put it so it's actionable without adding on work in the gathering of the collection. And that's just phenomenal.
I mean, you said you were so excited you couldn't contain yourself. I swear, I almost stood up and gave you a standing ovation. I just had to contain, like, is that appropriate? Would my board think that was weird? I swear, that was amazing. And I just wrote a couple of comments. You know, this new lens on data being almost like real time. I just want to shout to the rafters. That is incredible because you know, the annual data and really even when we moved to tracking like 60 credits at the end of freshman year, I thought, oh, that's brilliant, right? But honestly, that's even too late because it's all in the past, right? You cannot change the past. The only place that we can impact anything is right now in this moment. And now you have a way to know exactly with precision where to go to make a difference. That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible. You know, on one of the slides, I noticed that you said something about, I think it's slide 24, if you don't mind. Can we look at slide 24? Okay, you're talking about lack of capacity and implementation data, and then on the bottom, dispositions and beliefs. You know, a lot of times I notice when people in our system hear that word capacity, they feel like it means more to do, right? It's just a bigger load. I can't take on one more thing, right? But when you talk about dispositions and beliefs, that isn't more. That's actually less, right? And that is such deep work and profound work when we can give people the tools, the adults in our system tools to reflect on not only their beliefs about themselves, but their beliefs about our students, right? I mean, the mentoring program I talk about ad nauseum, we used to have a saying, you know, every young person has a champion, speak to the champion and the champion will respond, right? But you have to see the champion. You have to know that champion's there in spite of whatever crazy behavior you're seeing, right? And to be able to speak to that. You know, and all this data is great, but really what it comes down to is a relationship, right? I got to experience that today. I was, you know, some of you know I'm a substitute teacher once in a while. And boy, I was in a middle school class that was just, I can't even, off the rails. I just can't, there's not even words to describe it. And we didn't end our day that way because I was able to have one-on-one conversations with kids and then things started to change. But when I, you know, just blah, 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 wasn't making a difference. I had to find a way to build some little relationship with them. And then that had an impact. So, you know, the shape data that you're looking at, you know, where you're saying, let's look at those 46 kids and like, let's really dig in and see what have we done? What's working? What's not working? You know, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Like we have to look at what have we done that's not working? Let's stop doing that. Let's do something new. And now you have just carved a course for us to do that. Bravo. I've got goosebumps, literally. This is so exciting. Really great. Really, really great.
Well, I've said it before, but this is now my 33rd year on the board. I have never had the confidence I have today in the leadership team of Glenn Vanderzee and Teresa Marquez and Teresa's team behind her. I just haven't seen this level of, you know, imaginative thinking based on, you know, ground level experience with our district, with our population and so on. But you two, I'd put the two of you and your teams up against anyone in this state. We have the best.
I'll take myself out of that equation and thank Michelle and Tom for their support in those efforts as well, because
I'm putting you back in that equation because I have not seen a superintendent like you. And it makes possible what we're seeing.
Awesome. Lei, do you have any comments or questions?
Yes, I was wondering that about a year and a half, close to 2 years, that we have lost learning during, from the COVID-19. Does this really impact the data from the LCAP? And could we have a comparison, go back, 3 years ago, compare with what happened during the time of COVID and what happened now? We're starting from the next 3 years, so we can see the data that we implemented and the change of the data, when you finish the LCAP.
Yeah, so most of the time or previously when I've come to present the LCAP, a lot of the data has that comparison. So even today you saw 2 years comparison for that. And some of them you see multiple years of data that's compared, but most of that comparative data, one, it's not so easily comparable, but we have to be careful. And I'm gonna, rely on Kristen, my data person, to, give the details as to what data can be compared with what. And then she does a really good job of putting it together for the presentation. We can compare and look at trends, but as we shift to looking at the impact to the student, right? Looking more closely at the periodic, the early warning system, and we could, right? Again, this is the first time I think I've brought it officially to the board, being able to see, okay, even though it's not the same student, right? Being able to at least maybe bring and say, hey, at the 6-week grading, period, this year versus this year, we had this many students. Then we had that. I think what's more valuable is to maybe look at the first 6 grading periods. We had this many students. The next grading period, if we intervened, we should see who came off. How many of those students came off, like, to see if what we implemented was appropriate, right? And so for us, it's like acting in that now to be able to say, okay, if we have those 46, just even as an example, right? What's going on? What are we doing for them? And then did they stop? They stopped at the 6. They didn't get a single next referral. And we continue to just be at the 46 because these that were the 348 that were at 2 to 5, they didn't get to the 6+. The 98% that are at the 0-1, let's keep doing what we need to do so we don't grow that 348. So I'd rather look at like those data points that allow us then to really see if what we're doing is actually impacting in that immediacy as opposed to waiting to the end. But we can definitely look at trends.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. There's really amazing presentation about LCAP. What I was wondering is the part that when you mentioned at the next step is support for school site in the coordination of tier student intervention. So what are your plans to support the school side for the interventions?
Yeah, so I'm gonna throw it out there. I'm thinking that the best approach for that one is an administrator, associate principal of tiered student supports to really be able to do all this shift in the wonderful stuff that's happening, supported by the district, but really done at the school sites. All the interventions, the supports, being able to look at those 348 students and say, okay, where's the team? What do we need to do? Let's coordinate it. Let's make sure they don't become added to the 46 and specific to school sites. So I know we talked about it last year as part of it. I really do believe that there's a potential for a response of how to really coordinate those services and support the school sites.
Thank you.
Along with all the other stuff that is listed as part of the LCAP, right? If we're really going to take that integrated approach, how do we coordinate all those pieces?
Thank you. And thank you all the
Thank you.
staff that who put together this amazing presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Oh.
Okay, well, just basically, I was gonna echo what everyone else has been saying, that, the past two presentations from Ms. Marquez and, Ms. Guerrero were very thorough and easy to understand, because honestly, unlike a lot of you all here, I probably understand a lot less about these things than everyone else, especially from like a student perspective, but I definitely think that it was presented in a way that like I understood. And, it seems to me that you all are innovating and just trying to like break the status quo and create new ways to elevate students from their current positions, which is very admirable. So all I have to say is like, thank you for your work.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Well, here I go.
Let's
Let's
go.
see how
Let's go.
brief I could be. Gosh, I think that's. what I'm
Okay.
thinking
Madam
for
President,
myself.
I
Yes.
just need to, I had to hire someone to stay with my mom tonight and I need to leave at 9:45, so I have
Okay.
another 15 minutes.
Yeah, okay, great. So, the whole child approach, I really appreciate that. It's more than instruction and at the circle, what is it, the behavior misinstruction, academic gaps, falls behind academically. I thought that was like a perfect analogy, comparison to put all the things together. So thank you for that. Because we do have to be looking at all of that in order to really make real progress. And that was helpful to see in comparison with the 6 goals, right? I think there's 6 LCAP goals versus, to your point, going, this is LCAP goal 1, this is our progress. LCAP goal 2, this is our progress. And another thing that I really appreciated was the outcome data, capacity data, implementation data. And I did notice that there was a focus on outcome data. And for capacity data and implementation data, we talked about that being work in progress. And I couldn't help but to think too, like everything that we talked about today, it was beautifully packaged and set up for us to really understand and reflect and like go through it, right? But some of this stuff is happening at school sites, right? Like we have our MTSS coordinators. I mean, some of these are just great practices.
Yes, yeah. So we do have like our MTSS teachers on special assignment as one of the actions in response, right, to the goals. For me, it's really looking at, okay, so how do we measure the implementation of this particular action, right? So what's the work that the TOSAs are doing across the site? Is it common across the sites? And we know that there has to be variations, but do we have that baseline of what our TOSAs, each of them are doing at each of our school sites, right? So if we set the TOSAs to do X, Y, and Z, is there adherence to that at each of our school sites? What's the quality of that, of the work or the program features that we've described? What's the exposure, meaning are we reaching the targeted population that we want to reach?
Yep.
And then what's the responsiveness? What's the level of engagement when it comes to the students that we're serving?
Is this shared with like administration, like there's principal meetings and
Mhm.
engagement, right?
So you're the first. I wanted to bring it to the board first. I did ask them to
Okay.
join, so I don't know how many of my principals are on the Zoom. But we did begin at just this last principals meeting Tuesday. We actually had a joint meeting with our principals and our MTSS teachers on special assignment, where we really started honing in. I did present to them the whole concept of the integrated approach
Yep.
and looking at it through the whole challenge. And we started really looking at defining what's that tier 1 integrated instruction, behavior, social emotional look like.
Yep.
And we actually started looking at, the answer's been there all along for us. MTSS tier 1 is effective teaching and effective leadership. And we have that already defined for us. We have the California standards for the teaching profession, and we have the standards for the educational leaders. It's right there for us already.
I love that. Yeah, that resonates. I'm gonna start gearing up to doing my school visits. And as we start gearing up to doing school presentations, I'm really looking forward to seeing how principals are thinking about this. What are their goals around this? Just this work, because this is the work. at the school sides, like as a whole. So, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For all of the team's work.
Yes,
'cause
thank
it
you very
really
much.
took
I
a
thank
lot.
you for the presentation tonight, but also the work that you're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks as a team with all these meetings and gathering input. I mean, there's been some questions here tonight, but there are a lot of things in that LCAP. There's parent community involvement specialists, there's social workers that have been added, there's counselors that have been added, and now we talk about just other aspects within that LCAP so that we make sure we create a plan that's comprehensive, that hits all these 6 goals. So thanks for this and for the work to come.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Yes, round of applause. I felt that too. Okay, we are officially in item 12.03. Discussion and action to receive and adopt the second reading proposed amendments for board policy 5141.52 suicide prevention. Associate Superintendent Marquez.
Yes, this is the second reading being brought forth to the board. It's in alignment with our CSBA and gamut language. I will note that there is one change that was provided by input from the social worker, and it was changed from suicide attempt to ideations. It's just a minor language change that they felt was more responsive to how they want to portray the aspect of suicide.
Move for approval.
Second.
So I got a motion by trustee Doe, second by Herrera. Lee, how do you vote?
Actually, would it be possible to move a third reading of this to the next meeting? Because I know that the SGB team had thoughts on this that they weren't able to like fully develop and talk through. So if it would be possible to have a third reading, then that would be good.
Okay, I think that's possible. Okay, we can just make sure. Do you want-
We don't have a deadline to adopt this,
Deadline.
right?
No,
Can-
that's possible.
Yeah.
Will y'all engage with SGB? Okay, great. So then that's what we'll do. We'll just bring back a third reading after students have an opportunity to take a look and get feedback. Thank you for that. All right, so let's go on to section 13, 13.01. This is to approve contracts for professional services over 25,000
Move for approval.
assistant superintendent.
Second.
Okay, let me finish my sentence, please. Moved by Herrera, seconded by, who was it seconded by? Doe, okay. See, I can't even keep track. It's on a mission. I feel you. I'm sorry. I will do better. Lee, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Vote passes unanimously. Okay, yes.
On item 12.02, there was a member of the public who wished to speak.
Oh, oh no. I'm sorry, I did not catch that.
That's-
Can we go back to that? Let's go back to 12.02.
Mr. Thomas Brittendahl, you've been unmuted if you care to speak.
I can read it for him. He submitted online comment.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome. Give me just 1 second. Public comment from Thomas Brittendahl. I applaud the district in giving shape and illuminate to site administrators two powerful electronic tools that can prioritize the students who need interventions, an electronic tool that could do the work far greater than any single individual. I and others from ESTA look forward to working with the district to figure out the optimal way to allocate LCAP funds to maximize the benefit for our students. That is the end of public comment under 1202.
Thank you for that catch. My apologies. Okay, so we got 13.0, nothing under section 14 or 15. Now we are on consent calendar.
Move for approval.
Second.
So moved by Doe, seconded by Herrera. Lee, how do you vote?
Aye.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, passes unanimously. So that's 16 to 20. We are in section 21. There are no public, there are no written reports here. 22, all right, 22.01, opportunity for Board of Trustees to request future items. Is there any request items for future agenda?
I don't have any future item, but I hope that staff could give some of the requested item some date rather than to be determined. So,
Yeah, we'll work on that between now and March,
thank
the
you.
March meeting.
Got it. Yep. Okay. Are there anything else? Anybody? No? Any future items? No? Okay, great. Section 23. All right, comments. Let's start with Herrera.
Thank you. I have no comment.
Cortese?
I just want to share with the board that I was so excited to go see the annual Model United Nations program at Santa Teresa that's back in person. I actually participated in Zoom for the last couple of years, which was amazing. They could do that on Zoom. I was in awe of them. But so great to see 800 students gather at Santa Teresa for just an
Wow.
amazing, amazing conference. I'm always so moved by what our kids are capable of.
Lee? Oh, you already did. Go.
No, I
Right?
didn't say
Did
yet.
you? Wait, did you? I'm sorry.
No,
You didn't
I-
make a comment, right?
No.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
All right, I just want to say that is, thank you, Associate Superintendent Marcus, as well as your staff has done such a wonderful job for those two presentations. I would like to request to be included in IPC, at least, and maybe one board member who interested. And maybe reach out to the community when the date of the meeting. So, if they want to observe or they want to be involved. So I have.
Go. I have no comment. Lee,
Also no comment.
Vanderzee.
Even with pride, thanking the community for staying engaged with us. Thank you for the team for staying engaged with everything. All of you are amazing. And I think for our educators and our students that are about doing good things on the, at their sites and moving towards that Spartan East Side promise.
Right, that's right. Board meeting evaluation.
So
Great focus on academic
absolutely.
policy and everything.
As it should be, right?
Well, and I just want to say, yes to that. And, Mr. Pardo probably would not get a good grade, but this was, because he measures us if we get done before 8 o'clock. But this was such time well invested, and no shade on my colleague. I thought the presentations were perfect, not too long. In fact, I wouldn't have cut a single slide. So I just, again, am expressing my gratitude to the depth and comprehensiveness of the presentations. They were amazing.
Ditto to that. We might need this a little bit more frequently. Just saying. Those periodic reports, right? We're doing this periodically. Let's talk about it periodically. Okay. Legal counsel, we're on section 24. Is there anything to report?
Yes, from closed session item 2.07, the board unanimously approved a settlement agreement and release of claims in the action Jane Doe versus Eastside Union High School District. In Santa Clara Superior Court case number 21 CV 388191. Pursuant to the agreement, the district shall pay to one Jane Doe and one the amount of $1,187,500 in exchange for which the action will be dismissed with prejudice and the district is released from all and any claims against the district and its current and former employees. The agreement further provides that it is a settlement and compromise of disputed claims, and it is not an admission of liability by any party. The board also unanimously approved a settlement agreement and release of claims in the action Jane Doe versus Eastside Union High School District Superior Court case number 21 CV 388191. Pursuant to the agreement, the district shall pay to Jane Doe 2 the amount of $1,187,500 in exchange for which the action will be dismissed with prejudice and the district is released from any and all claims against the district and its current and former employees. The agreement further provides that it is a settlement and compromise of disputed claims, and it is not an admission of liability by any party. A copy of the settlement agreements are available upon request to the district. There are no further actions to report.
Great, thank you for that. It is 9:44. Meeting adjourned.